Welcome to the Crow's Tavern. Tonight, we'll journey back to the time of the Norse people, exploring their villages, customs, and daily lives as we drift toward peaceful sleep together. After our story ends, you'll hear the gentle sounds of a crackling fire that will continue for hours without interruption. These soothing sounds will help guide you into a deep and restful sleep. Now let us begin our journey into the Viking world and allow the ancient tales to carry you towards slumber. The last hints of daylight were fading into a gentle twilight as Thor stood upon the rocky shore of the fjord. The narrow inlet of water stretched before him like a pathway of liquid silver, flanked on either side by towering mountains that seemed to cradle the sky between their peaks. His red cloak settled around his broad shoulders, the weight of Mjolnir at his side, a familiar comfort rather than a burden. Tonight, the mighty hammer would remain quiet if the Norns willed it so. The air carried the scent of pine and salt, mingling together in a fragrance that filled Thor's lungs as he breathed deeply. The cool evening breeze stirred his golden hair and beard, bringing with it whispers from the distant sea. Far above, stars began to appear one by one, like tiny fragments of bifrost scattered across the darkening canvas of night. Thor was not alone on his vigil. Nearby, two of his most trusted companions prepared a small fire, their movements unhurried and practiced. Thialfi, fleet of foot and keen of eye, arranged kindling with nimble fingers. Beside him, the warrior Tyr sat upon a smooth boulder, his legendary one-handed skill evident even in the simple task of striking flint to steel. Soon a modest flame danced before them, casting warm light that scarcely reached the dark waters of the fjord but provided comfort against the growing chill. The villagers spoke of 3 boats, Tyr said, his voice low and measured, small vessels, but Jotun-made. Thor nodded, his gaze never leaving the distant curve where the fjord bent around a jutting cliff face. They test our boundaries since the last peace binding. Nothing more, perhaps. Or perhaps something more, Thialfi added, settling cross-legged by the fire. The fishing has been good these past moons. The giants may look upon human prosperity with hungry eyes. The god of thunder said nothing to this, but his fingers absently traced the runes etched into Mjolnir's handle, not in anticipation of violence, but in contemplation. Many among the Aesir would have thundered forth at the first mention of Jotun incursion, calling for battle and glory, but Thor had learned, slowly, over more centuries than mortals could count, that sometimes the greatest strength lay in patience, in watching, in understanding before acting. The mist that had been gathering along the water's surface thickened as night deepened, forming a soft blanket that drifted lazily across the fjord. Through it, the glow of the moon cast an ethereal light, transforming the scene into something that existed between dreams and waking. The distant rush of a waterfall echoed between the mountain walls, its constant rhythm a soothing backdrop to their quiet vigil. From somewhere in the forest behind them came the soft hooting of an owl, followed by the rustling of wings as it took flight. A silent hunter in the darkness. Thor watched its shadowy form glide overhead, a reminder that many eyes kept watch this night. Not all of them belonging to gods or giants. "Tell me of the village," Thor said after a time, turning to look at Thialfi. "How fare the people?" Thialfi smiled, reaching for a skin of mead they had brought with them. "They prosper, though they fear the coming of winter as all mortals do. The harvest was plentiful this year, their stores are full." He passed the skin to Thor. The elder, Halfdan, speaks often of the summer when you visited their hall and blessed their fields with rain during the great drought. Thor accepted the mead, taking a modest sip before passing it to Tyr. The honey-sweet liquid warmed him from within, a pleasant contrast to the cool mist that occasionally brushed against his skin. "I remember," he said, "his father was chieftain then, a good man who offered bread before asking favors. A rare quality," Tyr observed, "in gods or men." A comfortable silence fell between them, punctuated only by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant lapping of water against stone. Thor's gaze returned to the fjord, to the passage where the Jotun boats might appear, yet his thoughts drifted to the village nestled in the valley beyond the forest, to the families sleeping under thatched roofs, children dreaming of adventure, elders recounting tales by dying hearth fires. It was for them he stood watch, not for glory or songs of battle. The hours passed with a gentle slowness, marked by the gradual movement of stars across the night sky. Occasionally one of them would add wood to the fire or share a quiet observation about their surroundings. There was no need for constant speech between companions who had faced both glory and hardship together. It was Thialfi who noticed it first, a change in the quality of silence that hung over the fjord. "Listen," he said, raising a hand. Thor and Tyr fell still, their senses reaching out into the darkness. At first, there was nothing beyond the usual sounds of the night. Then, faintly, came the rhythmic splash of oars dipping into water, followed by the subtle creak of wooden planks shifting against one another. "They come," Tyr said simply, rising to his feet with fluid grace despite his years of battle. Thor held up a hand, a gesture for patience rather than preparation for conflict. "Let us see what they intend before we decide our response." The three companions moved closer to the water's edge, positioning themselves where the firelight would not compromise their vision. The mist parted briefly, revealing a dark shape gliding through the water. A boat of unusual design, its prow carved into the likeness of a serpent with eyes that seemed to catch what little light there was. Behind it, two more vessels followed, each smaller than the first. As the lead boat drew nearer, Thor could make out its occupants. 3 Jotun, their massive forms hunched to fit within the confines of their craft. Even seated, they towered over what a standing man would measure. Their features were stern and weathered like the mountains themselves, their eyes reflecting the starlight with an ancient intelligence that many among the Aesir refused to acknowledge. "Hail, Thor Odinson," called the foremost giant, in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, yet remained carefully modulated, not to echo too loudly between the fjord walls. Strange to find the mighty thunderer without his chariot of goats, keeping watch like a common sentry. Thor stepped forward, allowing the giants to see him clearly. He made no move toward Mjolnir, though his hand remained near enough to grasp it if needed. "Hail, Hrimgrimnir of the Stone Halls," he replied, recognizing the Jotun leader from councils long past. "Strange indeed to find you so far from your mountain home, sailing under cover of night toward lands under my protection." A deep chuckle emanated from the giant. "Ever Derek, son of Odin, some things remain constant even as the world changes around us." The Jotun made a gesture, and the 2 boats behind him slowed their approach, maintaining a respectful distance. "We seek no quarrel this night, merely understanding. Understanding comes more readily in daylight, with words exchanged openly," Tyr said, his voice carrying the weight of one who had sacrificed his hand to bind Fenrir for the good of all realms. Hrimgrimnir's gaze shifted to the god of war, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Some matters are best discussed away from eager ears, especially in times of uncertain peace. Thor felt the subtle tension in the air, like the gathering pressure before a storm. Not hostile yet, but pregnant with possibility. "Speak plainly, Hrimgrimnir. What understanding do you seek that brings 3 boats of Jotun to these waters, when honest folk are abed?" The giant was silent for a moment, his massive hands resting on the gunwale of his boat. The vessel drifted closer to shore, though still remained a respectful distance away. "Rumors reach even our halls, Thunderer. Tales of stirrings in the depths of Niflheim, of shadows growing longer in the roots of Yggdrasil, of alliances forming and breaking among the realms." His voice lowered. "We came to see whether Thor Odinson still watches over these lands and these people as he once vowed, or if his attention has turned elsewhere." Thor felt Thialfi and Tyr shift beside him, alert but waiting for his lead. The god of thunder considered his response carefully, knowing that words could build bridges or burn them just as surely as actions. "My oath remains unbroken," Thor said finally, his deep voice carrying across the water without needing to rise in volume. "These lands and these people have my protection, as they have since time beyond memory. If that is the understanding you sought, you have it." Hrimgrimnir studied him for a long moment, his ancient eyes seeming to look through Thor rather than at him. Then, almost imperceptibly, the tension in his massive shoulders eased. "Good," he said simply. "There are few certainties left in these changing times. It is reassuring to know that some pledges endure." The Jotun made another gesture, and his companions began to turn their boats with surprising grace for such large beings in small craft. "We will trouble your waters no further this night, Odinson," Hrimgrimnir said. "But know this, not all among my kin share my respect for old boundaries and older oaths. Some whisper that the time of gods wanes while the time of giants returns. I do not share their haste to upset the balance, but neither can I entirely calm their ambition. A warning freely given is a gift worthy of thanks," Thor acknowledged with a slight inclination of his head. "Safe passage back to your halls, Hrimgrimnir. May your voyage be swift and the waters kind." A smile, unexpected and brief, crossed the giant's weathered face. "Until we meet again, Thunderer, in peace or otherwise." With that, he dipped his enormous oar into the water, and the serpent-prowed boat began to glide away, following its companions back into the mist that had gathered once more upon the fjord. Thor watched until the shapes of the boats had been swallowed completely by darkness and mist, and even the sound of their oars had faded to nothing. Only then did he allow his shoulders to relax slightly, though his gaze remained watchful. "That was unexpected," Thialfi said quietly as they returned to their fire, which had burned low during the exchange. Tyr nodded, adding a few pieces of wood to the embers. "A test, perhaps, or genuinely a seeking of reassurance." The firelight illuminated the scarred side of his face as he looked up at Thor. "What do you make of his words about stirrings in Niflheim?" Thor settled onto a boulder, resting his forearms on his knees as he gazed into the reviving flames. "Whispers reach us all, from all the realms. Some true, some born of fear, some seeded deliberately to unsettle old alliances." He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his palm. "But Hrimgrimnir has never been known to spread falsehoods, even in the days when our peoples fought more often than they spoke." The three fell silent again, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire crackled softly before them. Above, the stars continued their eternal journey across the heavens, indifferent to the concerns of gods or giants. The mist drifted and swirled over the fjord, sometimes thinning enough to reveal the glassy surface of the water, other times thickening until it seemed a world unto itself. Thor's gaze followed the path of the stars, recognizing the constellations that mortals had named after great heroes and beasts. There was Orvandil's toe, placed in the sky by Thor himself after their journey across the Elevegar rivers, when his companion's frostbitten toe had broken off. Thor had thrown it heavenward, creating a star to honor his friend's bravery. And there the seven sisters, dancing their eternal dance above the world of mortals. Each pinpoint of light held stories older than the oldest runes carved by human hands. The fjord itself seemed alive in these quiet hours, not with the bustling life of day, but with a more ancient presence. The water breathed with gentle currents, drawing in and releasing with rhythms that matched the slow pulse of Yggdrasil itself. Small ripples occasionally disturbed the surface as fish moved in the depths, their silver scales catching moonlight in brief, scattered flashes. Once, a sleek head broke the surface. A seal, curious about the watchers on shore, its dark eyes reflecting starlight before it slipped silently back beneath the waters. The fjords remember when they were carved by ice, Tyr said quietly, following Thor's gaze across the water. They remember when giants and gods first walked these lands. They will remember long after we are gone. Thor nodded, understanding the truth in his friend's words. Even to the Aesir, with their long lives that span thousands of mortal years, the land itself was ancient beyond measure. It had seen the first dawn after Ginnungagap, had witnessed the ages unfold in slow, inevitable progression. The sound of water lapping against stone created a gentle rhythm that seemed to slow Thor's thoughts, bringing a meditative quality to the night. The scent of pine resin from the nearby forests mingled with the mineral tang of stone and the clean, crisp smell of the glacier-fed waters. Occasionally, when the breeze shifted, he could catch the faintest trace of wood smoke from the distant village, a reminder of the people under his protection, now sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding on their shores. Time passed in that peaceful interlude between tension and true rest. Thor found his thoughts drifting to other nights, other vigils, some ending in glorious battle, others in quiet resolution like this one. He had changed over the long centuries, perhaps more than many of his kin would believe possible. The hot-blooded youth who sought combat at every turn had gradually given way to a protector who understood that true strength often lay in restraint. Not that his arm had weakened or his courage dimmed, far from it, but he had come to value the peace between storms, the quiet moments of connection, the simple joy of a world in balance. These things were worth protecting, worth preserving through vigilance rather than victory. "Someone approaches," Theophil said suddenly, rising to his feet with the alertness that had made him such a valuable companion. Thor and Tyr turned toward the forest path, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. But the footsteps they heard were light and unhurried, not the heavy tread of Jotun, nor the stealthy advance of foes. From between the ancient pines emerged a slender figure, wrapped in a cloak of deep blue that seemed to gather moonlight and hold it close. Golden hair spilled out from beneath the hood, and as the figure drew nearer, familiar features came into view. High cheekbones, keen eyes that held both wisdom and warmth, lips curved in a gentle smile. "Sif," Thor said, his voice softening at the sight of his wife. "What brings you to our vigil at this late hour?" Sif pushed back her hood, allowing her golden hair, once the subject of Loki's most infamous prank, now restored and perhaps even more beautiful than before, to catch the firelight. "The night grows old, husband," she said, her voice melodic yet strong, "and I thought perhaps those who keep watch might welcome fresh bread and mead from the village." Only then did Thor notice the basket she carried, covered with a cloth that did little to contain the enticing aroma of newly baked bread. His stomach reminded him with a soft growl that many hours had passed since they had last eaten. Sif laughed, the sound like clear bells in the quiet night. "I see I was not mistaken." She set the basket down by the fire and began to unpack its contents. A loaf of dark bread still warm from the oven, a small wheel of cheese, some dried fruits, and a skin of fresh mead. Thor watched her with quiet appreciation. Sif was known throughout the realms for her beauty, but it was her strength and wisdom that had won his heart ages ago. While many tales spoke of his mighty deeds and thunderous battles, fewer told of her steadfast presence, her counsel in moments of doubt, her fierce protection of what she held dear. "You have visited the village, then?" Tyr asked, accepting a piece of bread with murmured thanks. Sif nodded, settling gracefully beside Thor on his boulder, her shoulder just touching his in a gesture of companionship. "I arrived at dusk, after you had departed. The elder Halfdan offered hospitality when he learned who I sought." A smile crossed her lips. "His granddaughter has just welcomed twins. Strong boys with voices to rival Thor's thunder by the sound of them." Thor felt a wash of contentment at this news. Birth, renewal, continuation. These were the true victories, more meaningful than any battle won. He remembered when his own children were born, the thundering joy that had filled his heart, more powerful than any storm he had ever summoned. How small they had seemed in his massive hands, yet how strong in their first cries. Now they were grown, finding their own paths through the tangled branches of Yggdrasil's great design. "The village thrives then," he said, his voice softening with the memory. The cycles of mortal life fascinated him. So brief compared to the gods, yet so vibrant, so full of purpose and meaning, each generation building upon the works of those who came before, each life a story woven into the greater tapestry. "It does," Sif confirmed, breaking off a piece of bread for herself. "Though they worry about the rumors of Jotun boats seen in the fjord." Her gaze met his, a question in her eyes. "They came, we spoke, they departed," Thorn said simply, though he knew Sif would read the nuances in his tone. "Hrimgrimnir sought reassurance that these lands remain under my protection." Sif's brow furrowed slightly. "Hrimgrimnir himself? Then the matter is more significant than village rumors would suggest." She had met the Jotun leader during one of the rare peace councils between their peoples, and knew his standing among the giants. Perhaps, Thor acknowledged, or perhaps old fears are stirring on both sides of ancient boundaries. He shared the substance of their exchange, including the Jotun's cryptic references to stirrings in Niflheim. When he finished, Sif was quiet for a time, her gaze distant as she considered his words. The fire popped and hissed as a drop of dew fell from a branch overhead, the sudden sound loud in the stillness that had settled around them. "The worlds are changing," she said at last. "We have felt it in Asgard as well. A shift in the currents of fate, like the first tremors before an avalanche. Yet change need not mean destruction," Theofi offered, his youthful optimism a welcome counterpoint to the weight of ancient concerns. Tyr nodded, his scarred face thoughtful. The young man speaks truth. Change has been the only constant since the worlds were formed from Yr's body. We endure by adapting, not by clinging to what was. Thor felt Sif's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his own, a silent gesture of unity and support. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, grateful for her presence. "Then we shall watch and listen and be ready for whatever comes," he said, not with fear, but with resolve. The conversation drifted to lighter matters then. Tales of recent happenings in Asgard, news from the other realms, memories of adventures shared long ago. The tension of the night's encounter gradually eased, replaced by the comfortable camaraderie of trusted friends. They ate the simple yet satisfying food Sif had brought, and the fresh mead warmed them from within against the cool embrace of the mist. As they talked, the deepest part of night began to give way to the first hints of approaching dawn. The stars faded gradually, and a pale luminescence touched the eastern sky above the mountains. The mist thinned, revealing the fjord in all its serene beauty, dark waters now touched with silver, reflecting the lightening sky like a mirror. "Dawn approaches," Sif observed, rising to her feet with fluid grace. "The night watch ends." Thor nodded, standing beside her. He stretched his massive frame, muscles loosening after the long hours of relative stillness. "And with it, our vigil. The Jotun will not return this day, I think. What will you tell the villagers?" Thialfi asked, gathering their few belongings as the fire burned down to embers. "The truth," Thorn replied, "that watchfulness brought peace this night, that they remain under protection, that life continues as it should." Tyr extinguished the last of the fire with careful attention, ensuring not a spark remained that might threaten the surrounding forest. "A good night's work," he said, satisfaction evident in his tone. "Not all victories require battle." As if to emphasize his words, a chorus of birdsong erupted from the trees around them, the first heralds of morning greeting the new day. The sweet melodies filled the air, rising and falling in patterns as old as time, yet ever new in their expression of simple joy. "Come," Thor said, gesturing toward the path that would lead them to the village. "Halfdan will be waiting for news, and I would see these thunderous twins that Sif speaks of." Together, the four companions made their way from the shore, leaving behind the quiet fjord as it transformed in the growing light. Thor cast one last glance over his shoulder at the peaceful waters where, hours before, an ancient understanding had been reaffirmed between old adversaries. No clash of weapons, no display of godly might, just words exchanged with respect, and boundaries acknowledged by both sides. As they walked the forest path, the world around them awakened fully to the new day. The tall pines swayed gently in the morning breeze, their needles releasing that distinctive sharp sweet fragrance that cleared the mind and lifted the spirits. Beneath their feet, the path was cushioned with years of fallen needles, making their footsteps nearly silent. Morning dew glistened on spider webs strung between branches, each droplet catching the sun's rays and scattering them into tiny rainbows. "I remember when these trees were saplings," Thor mused, reaching out to touch the rough bark of an ancient pine, "when Midgard was younger, and the boundaries between realms less defined." "You grow contemplative with age, Thunderer," Tyr observed with a hint of amusement. "There was a time when you would have been disappointed by a night without battle." Thor chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. There was indeed such a time. Youth is hasty in gods as in men. "And what of you, Thialfi?" Sif asked the youngest of their company. "Did you hope for more excitement in your watch?" The young man considered this as he walked, his steps light and sure on the forest path. "I have seen enough of battle to know its cost," he said finally. "There is honor in vigilance that prevents bloodshed, even if the skalds sing fewer songs about such nights." Thor nodded approvingly at his companion's wisdom. Thialfi had grown much since coming into his service, developing a thoughtfulness that balanced his natural courage and skill. The forest began to thin as they neared the village, giving way to cleared land where neat fields stretched toward the distant hills. The crops were tall and healthy, promising a bountiful harvest when the time came. Stone walls marked boundaries between properties, constructed with the careful precision that Thor had come to admire in human craftsmanship. Each rock fitted perfectly to its neighbors without mortar, creating structures that would stand for generations. The first sounds of village life reached them, a rooster crowing, the distant lowing of cattle, the rhythmic chunk of an axe splitting wood for morning fires. Smoke rose from chimneys in lazy spirals that dissolved into the clear blue sky. The peaceful scene brought a smile to Thor's face, a reminder of why quiet vigilance mattered as much as, perhaps more than, the glorious battles celebrated in Asgard's halls. Some might call it a night where nothing happened, but Thor knew better. In the spaces between grand events, in the quiet moments of restraint and wisdom, the true shape of the world was formed and preserved. This night of peaceful vigil might never be celebrated in the great halls of Asgard, never be recounted in skaldic verse or carved in eternal runes. Yet as they crested the hill and saw the village below, smoke rising gently from morning fires, people beginning to stir for the day's work, Thor felt a deeper satisfaction than any battle glory had ever brought him. This moment of perfect balance, of life continuing undisturbed, was worth every hour of vigilance, every careful word, every exercise of restraint. As they descended toward the village, the first direct rays of sunlight crested the eastern mountains, casting long shadows before them and illuminating their path with golden light. The village itself seemed to glow in this early morning radiance. The thatched roofs of the houses turned to gold, windows gleaming like polished amber. At the edge of the settlement, a figure awaited them. An old man with a snow-white beard, leaning on a staff of polished oak. His face was deeply lined, each wrinkle a record of seasons past, joys experienced, hardships endured. Yet his eyes were bright and clear, holding a wisdom that Thor had always respected in the elders of Midgard. "Halfdan," Thor greeted him, inclining his head in respect. "Lord Thor," the old man replied, his voice surprisingly strong despite his apparent age. "Lady Sif, honored ones, the village welcomes you." He gestured toward the nearest building, larger than the others, clearly the communal hall where the people gathered for important occasions. "You waited for our return," Thor observed as they approached. Halfdan nodded, falling into step beside them with surprising sprintness. Some watch from mountain heights, some from fjord shores, some from village boundaries, he said with a smile that deepened the lines around his eyes. Each vigilance has its purpose. Inside the hall, a fire burned in the central hearth, its smoke rising to escape through a hole in the roof. The space was simply furnished but comfortable, with benches along the walls and a few tables set with morning bread and mead. Several other villagers were present, younger men and women who clearly held positions of responsibility in the community. "Your lady wife has told us of the new lives that have joined your village," Thor said as they settled on the benches. "May we see these thunderous twins?" Halfdan beamed with grandfatherly pride and made a gesture toward a young woman seated in a corner. She rose, carrying a bundle wrapped in soft woolen blankets. while a young man beside her carried a similar package. Together they approached, their faces showing both awe at the divine visitors and the unmistakable glow of new parenthood. "My granddaughter Astrid and her husband Leif," Halfdan introduced them, "and their sons, born as yesterday's sun set." The young woman carefully presented her bundle to Thor, her movements reverent yet unafraid. Thor accepted the sleeping infant with hands that had wielded Mjolnir against the greatest foes of the realms, now gentle as summer rain as they cradled the tiny form. The baby's face was peaceful in slumber, perfect in its miniature features. Wisps of golden hair, not unlike Thor's own, covered the small head. As if sensing he was being observed, the infant's eyes fluttered open, clear blue, gazing up at the god with that unfocused yet somehow ancient look that all newborns possess. "Strong indeed," Thor murmured, feeling the solid weight of the child in his hands. "What names have you given them?" "This one is Thorvald," Astrid said, her voice strong with mother's pride. "And his brother is Tyvold, named for the protectors of our realm, if it pleases you." Thor smiled, genuinely touched by the honor. "Good names for strong sons," he approved, carefully returning Thorvald to his mother's arms. Ty received the other infant with his one hand, his scarred face softening as he gazed down at his namesake. "D May will grow straight and tall," Tyr pronounced, "and may they know more of peace than of war." A simple meal was shared then, the food humble by Asgard's standards, but offered with sincere hospitality and received with equal appreciation. Thor answered the villagers' questions about the Jotun sighting with calm reassurance, explaining that boundaries had been respected and no threat currently loomed. "We have lived beside the realm of giants since time beyond memory," Halfdan reminded the younger members of the community. "There have been seasons of strife and seasons of peace. We endure through both." Thor nodded, recognizing the echo of Tyr's earlier words about change and adaptation. These mortals, with their brief lives, understood the ebb and flow of time, perhaps better than the gods themselves. As the meal concluded, Thor and his companions prepared to depart, back to Asgard for Sif and himself, to other duties for Tyr and Thialfi. The villagers gathered outside to bid them farewell, offering gifts of food and mead for their journey, simple tokens of gratitude for the protection they had been given. Halfdan approached Thor one last time as the others made their preparations. The old man's eyes were thoughtful, his voice low enough that only the god could hear his words. "The stories tell of Ragnarok," he said, "of a final battle that will consume gods and giants alike. Yet I have always wondered." "What is it you wonder, Halfdan of the Fjord?" Thor asked, genuinely curious. "If, perhaps, that prophecy speaks not of inevitable doom, but of a choice, a path that might be taken or avoided." The old man's gaze was steady, unafraid to question the mysteries that even gods pondered. Nights like the one just past, where understanding replaces conflict, do they not weave a different pattern in the tapestry of fate? Thor considered this, struck by the mortal's insight. "Wise words from one whose years are but a moment to the Aesir," he said finally. "Perhaps the future is not as fixed as the Norns would have us believe. Perhaps each choice, each moment of restraint or wisdom, changes the pattern in ways too subtle for even divine eyes to see." Halfdan smiled, satisfied with this answer. "Then we shall continue our small part, tending our fields, raising our children, honoring the old ways while embracing the new. And you will continue yours, watching over boundaries both seen and unseen." "So we shall," Thor agreed, resting a hand briefly on the old man's shoulder, a gesture of respect between protector and protected, but also between one wise soul and another. With final farewells exchanged, Thor raised Mjolnir to the sky. Unlike its use in battle, this was a gentler summoning, calling not lightning to strike, but the forces needed to open the path back to Asgard. The air shimmered around them, reality itself seeming to bend and fold as the Bifrost Bridge formed, not with the spectacular rainbow display often seen, but with a subtle transformation of light and space. Thor cast one last glance at the peaceful village, at the fjord gleaming in the distance, at the mountains standing eternal watch over it all. A new day had begun in Midgard, unmarred by conflict, full of possibility. The small twins would grow, seasons would change, life would continue its beautiful, complex dance. And that, Thor thought, was victory enough, not just for a single night of vigilant peace, but for all the nights and days to follow, each one a testament to the enduring strength found not in conquest, but in care. As twilight deepened across the realms, casting long shadows through Yggdrasil's branches, Freya made her way along a winding path known to few beyond herself. The day's final light filtered through ancient trees whose crowns reached toward Asgard itself, their trunks so wide that even the goddess's arms could not encircle them. The forest floor beneath her feet was soft with centuries of fallen leaves, each step releasing the earthy fragrance of life in its endless cycle of renewal. Freya wore a simple gown of pale green silk that whispered against the undergrowth, its subtle sheen catching what little light remained. Her golden hair fell loose around her shoulders, adorned only with a circlet of fresh wildflowers gathered at dawn. Around her throat, the famed Brizimmerman necklace glowed with inner fire, its precious stones capturing starlight that had not yet appeared in the sky above. The forest grew denser as she walked, the path narrowing until it seemed to disappear entirely. Yet Freya moved with confidence, guided by knowledge older than the trees themselves. A nightingale called from somewhere nearby, its evening song sweet and plaintive in the gathering dusk. Freya paused, listening with a smile as the bird trilled a welcome that few would recognize as such. "Yes, little one," she murmured. "I have returned, as promised." Pushing aside a curtain of trailing vines, Freya stepped into a perfect circle of open space, a glade hidden from casual wanderers by enchantments as old as Midgard itself. Here the transition to night had progressed further, the sky above a deep velvet blue with the first stars beginning to emerge. Their light, combined with the soft glow of Freya's necklace, illuminated the secret garden that only she and a precious few others tended. The glade was not large by divine standards, perhaps 30 paces across, but within its boundaries grew wonders from all 9 realms. Flowers that bloomed only under starlight opened their petals as Freya entered, releasing fragrances that brought to mind distant memories of joy and love. Plants with luminous leaves created patterns of gentle light across the ground, while climbing vines spiraled up ancient standing stones, placed in a smaller circle at the garden's heart. Freya breathed deeply, letting the cares of the day fall away as she stepped fully into this space between worlds. Here, time moved differently, not faster or slower, but with a rhythm all its own, like the beating of a heart in peaceful sleep. She had created this garden eons ago, not as a display of power or beauty, though it held both in abundance, but as a sanctuary where the delicate balance between the realms could be maintained through careful tending. "Mother!" A voice like chiming bells called from near the standing stones. Freya looked up to see her daughter Hnoss kneeling beside a patch of silver-petaled flowers, her slender fingers gently stroking their stems. Like her mother, Hnoss glowed with an inner light, though hers was the softer radiance of youth and possibility rather than Freya's mature power. "You arrived earlier than expected," Freya said, crossing the soft grass to join her daughter. She knelt beside her, her movements fluid and graceful despite the day's exertions in the halls of Asgard. Onos smiled, tucking a strand of hair the color of moonlight behind her ear. "The twilight called to me, and I could not resist. Besides, these moon lilies needed attention before they bloom fully." She gestured to the silver flowers, which were indeed beginning to unfurl as the stars multiplied overhead. Freya nodded approvingly, noticing the careful way her daughter had cleared away encroaching plants without harming them, creating space for the moon lilies to flourish. "You have your grandmother's touch," she said softly, remembering her own mother, Frigg, and her legendary skill with growing things. "Where is Gersemi tonight?" Freya asked, referring to her younger daughter, who often joined them in their garden tending. "Assisting father with some matter in his hall," Henos replied, speaking of Odin, Freya's sometimes distant husband. "She said she would try to join us before moonrise." Freya nodded, feeling neither disappointment nor concern. Each of her daughters had their own paths to walk, their own relationships to nurture. That Henos found peace in this garden as she did was blessing enough. Together, they began the evening's work, moving from one section of the garden to another with practiced ease. The garden did not require the constant attention that mortal plants might. The flora here had been gathered from across the 9 realms over countless centuries, each specimen chosen not just for its beauty, but for its place in the complex web of energies that Freya maintained. Some plants strengthened bonds of love, others brought fertility to barren places, still others preserved memories or dreams. Together they formed a living tapestry that reflected Freya's domains and responsibility. As full night descended, the garden transformed. Flowers that had been closed tight during daylight hours unfurled in a graceful dance, their petals spreading to reveal centers that glowed with soft blues, purples, and silvers. Leaves turned upward to catch starlight like precious water, their edges outlined in luminescent dew. The standing stones at the garden's center began to hum with almost imperceptible vibration, resonating with the movement of distant stars. "Look, mother," Nos whispered, pointing to a cluster of crystal bellflowers that had begun to sway, though no breeze stirred the air. As they watched, the delicate blooms chimed against one another, creating a melody so faint it seemed to exist on the boundary between sound and imagination. "The cosmic alignment progresses," Freya said, her voice equally soft. 3 days until the convergence. Every few centuries, the stars aligned in patterns that increased the flow of energy between realms. During these times, Freya's garden served a purpose beyond beauty and sanctuary. It became a regulator, a place where the increased energies could be safely channeled and distributed. Without such tending, the surge might manifest in less benign ways: storms in Midgard, erratic magic in Alfheim, or even cracks in the boundaries between worlds. Mother and daughter worked in companionable silence, pruning where needed, whispering encouragement to reluctant bloomers, strengthening the subtle enchantments that protected rarer specimens. Their hands, though soft and elegant, were not afraid of soil or thorns. Freya had long believed that true care required direct touch, a willingness to connect without barriers. As they tended a bed of dream roses, flowers said to capture the essence of sleepers' most beautiful visions, a soft rustling came from the far side of the glade. Freya straightened, alert but not alarmed. Her garden was well protected against true threats, but smaller mischief makers occasionally found their way inside, drawn by curiosity or the allure of magical flora. continue here," she murmured to Hennos, who nodded and returned to her gentle work with the dream roses. Freya moved silently across the glade, following the sound as it darted from one shadow to another. Her feet made no impression on the soft grass, her passage disturbed not even the most delicate dewdrop. As she neared the garden's edge, where ancient oaks stood sentinel between the sacred space and the outer forest, she caught a flicker of movement, quick and low to the ground. "I see you, little thief," she said, her voice neither harsh nor angry but clear and carrying. "You need not hide from me in my own garden." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a small figure emerged from behind a cluster of phosphorescent mushrooms. It stood no taller than Freya's knee, with a body like that of a child, but proportioned differently. Longer arms, a larger head with pointed ears that twitched nervously. Its skin had the texture of birch bark, pale with darker striations, and its eyes were large and completely black, reflecting the starlight like pools of still water. "Forest spirit," Freya acknowledged with a slight inclination of her head. "You are far from your usual haunts." The spirit shifted from foot to foot, clutching something to its chest that gleamed with a pearlescent light. It did not speak. Few of its kind could master the languages of gods or humans, but its expression conveyed a mixture of defiance and apprehension. Freya's gaze dropped to the spirit's hands, where it held a single bloom, one of the rarest in her garden. The lunar orchid flowered only during specific alignments of the moon and stars, its petals absorbing celestial energies and transforming them into a nectar sought after by enchanters and potion makers throughout the realms. "That does not belong to you," Freya said gently. She knelt, bringing herself closer to the spirit's level, though still taller. "It cannot survive outside this garden, little one. Already it fades in your grasp." Indeed, the orchid's glow was diminishing, its petals beginning to curl inward as if in pain. The spirit looked down at it, then back at Freya, conflicting emotions crossing its strange features. "I understand wanting beautiful things," Freya continued, her voice taking on a musical quality that seemed to blend with the night sounds around them. "Few understand that desire better than I. But beauty belongs where it can flourish, not locked away for one alone to possess." As she spoke, Freya reached up to touch her Brisingamen necklace, a treasure she had once paid a steep price to acquire, driven by that same desire for beauty the spirit now exhibited. The memory of that transaction was not one she revisited often, but it had taught her valuable lessons about desire and its consequences. The spirit titled its head, seeming to consider her words. Then, with movements that suggested reluctance but not resentment, it stepped forward and offered the wilting orchid to Freya. "Thank you," she said sincerely, accepting the flower with cupped hands. Rather than scolding further, she added, "Would you like to see it restored, and perhaps learn why it must remain here?" Curiosity overcame caution in the spirit's expression. It nodded, large eyes blinking slowly. Freya smiled and beckoned for the spirit to follow her back toward the center of the garden. As they walked, she began to sing softly, a melody without words that nonetheless conveyed meaning. Growth, renewal, belonging, home. The orchid in her hands responded, its petals gradually uncurling, its inner light strengthening once more. Hnos looked up as they approached, her eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of the forest spirit trailing behind her mother. But she asked no questions, merely making space as Freya knelt beside the bed of lunar flowers from which the orchid had been taken. "Watch closely," Freya told the spirit as she gently returned the flower to its place among its kin. Her fingers worked the soil around its stem, ensuring it was properly seated, while her song continued. now incorporating elements of binding and connection. The moment the orchid was fully replanted, a change came over it. Tiny filaments of light, invisible until now, extended from its roots to connect with those of neighboring plants. The entire bed seemed to shimmer with welcome as the prodigal bloom was reintegrated into the greater whole. More surprisingly, the other plants appeared to strengthen as well, their collective glow intensifying. "You see," Freya said to the spirit, whose black eyes were wide with wonder, "the lunar orchid is beautiful alone, yes, but its true power, its true purpose, lies in how it connects with others. It both gives and receives strength. If taken, both the flower and the garden suffer." She looked directly into the spirit's eyes. "Much like people, little one, much like all living things." The spirit stared at the glowing network of roots and stems for a long moment before looking back at Freya. It made a complex gesture with its long fingers, an expression of understanding and apology in the silent language of its kind. Freya nodded in acknowledgement. "You are welcome to stay and observe if you wish. There is much a forest spirit might learn here that could benefit your own woodlands." She paused, then added with a twinkle in her eye, "And when the moon reaches its zenith, I may have a gift for you, one you can take with you, unlike the orchid." The spirit's ears perked up at this, its posture relaxing from its previous tension. It settled onto the ground at a respectful distance, folding its bark-like legs beneath it, content for now to watch. Nos caught her mother's eye with a small smile. "Your compassion never wavers," she murmured as they returned to their work. "Nor should it," Freya replied softly. "The spirit meant no true harm, only acted from desire and limited understanding. How many of us, even among the Aesir, have done the same at times?" Together they continued their careful tending, moving from the lunar orchids to a section where plants from Muspelheim grew. Fiery blooms that would have scorched mortal hands but thrived under Freya's care. Despite their seemingly dangerous nature, these flowers served an essential purpose, channeling and transforming destructive energies into creative ones. The forest spirit watched with evident fascination as Freya and Hnoss worked, occasionally shifting position to get a better view, but never interfering. Other small creatures began to emerge as the night deepened. Glowing moths with wingspans as wide as a human hand, darting between flowers to collect nectar. Crystalline snails that left trails of luminescent silver as they traversed leaves and stems. And once, briefly, a magnificent hare with fur like moonlight and eyes that held more wisdom than any mortal beast could claim. The hare paused near the forest spirit, their gazes meeting in silent communication, before it continued on its mysterious errand through the garden. The spirit seemed both awed and comforted by this encounter, settling more deeply into its observant role. As Freya had predicted, the moon soon rose above the treetops, its light adding another layer of enchantment to the already magical scene. The standing stones at the garden center began to glow more intensely, their rune-carved surfaces illuminated from within. Dew that had collected on leaves and petals throughout the garden caught the moonlight and transformed it, creating countless tiny prisms that scattered rainbow fragments across the glade. "It is time for the blessing," Freya said, straightening from where she had been encouraging a shy vine to climb more boldly up its trellis. She glanced at the forest spirit, then at Hnoss. "Will you prepare the basin, daughter?" Hnoss nodded, moving to a small stone font half hidden among ferns near the standing stones. From a silver pitcher that had been cooling in the shadow of the largest stone, she poured water that gleamed strangely, seeming to hold stars within its depths. Freya approached the center of the garden, lifting her hands toward the moon in a gesture that was part greeting, part invocation. When she spoke, her voice carried the power that many forgot she possessed. Freya was not merely goddess of love and beauty, but of magic, fertility, and life's most profound mysteries. Blessed moon, eye of night, witness and catalyst, she intoned. Your light touches all realms, knows no boundaries. Flow through this sacred space, renew what ebbs, strengthen what falters, illuminate what hides. The moonlight seemed to respond, intensifying and focusing into a beam that connected the moon above to the garden below. Where it touched the standing stones, they hummed more loudly, their vibration spreading through the earth beneath, until the entire glade thrummed with harmonious energy. Freya moved to the basin where Hnoss had poured the star water. Cupping her hands, she collected some of the luminous liquid and approached a flower bed near where the forest spirit sat watching. There, amid more common blooms, grew modest plants with 5-petaled flowers of deepest blue. So dark they appeared almost black except for their centers, which held tiny points of light like captured stars. Night hearts, Freya explained to the attentive spirit. They grow in the deepest parts of ancient forests, but only where the bond between the trees and their guardians remains strong. She sprinkled the star water over the plants, which responded by releasing a soft sigh of fragrance into the air, a scent like wild berries, fresh moss, and something indefinable that brought to mind the feeling of being safely home after a long journey. To carry the essence of sanctuary, Freya continued, selecting the strongest of the plants and carefully extracting it with a generous portion of soil around its roots. Unlike the lunar orchid, a nightheart can thrive outside this garden if planted with care and tended with respect. She gathered moss from nearby, wrapping it around the plant's roots to create a transportable bundle, then knelt before the forest spirit. This is my gift to you. Take it to the heart of your woodlands and plant it where moonlight can reach through the canopy, even if only as dappled patterns. Tend it, protect it, and it will strengthen the bonds between all living things in your domain. The spirit's eyes widened as it realized what was being offered. Reverently, it extended its long-fingered hands to accept the bundle, cradling it as gently as a newborn child. Its fingers traced patterns in the air above the plant, symbols of gratitude and promise in its silent language. You are welcome, Freya responded, understanding perfectly, and you are welcome to return to this garden when the season turns, to learn more of tending and balance. Only, she added with a gentle smile, perhaps announce your presence next time, rather than seeking to take what catches your eye. The spirit ducked its head in a gesture that somehow conveyed both embarrassment and amusement. It rose to its feet, the nightheart clutched carefully against its bark-like chest, and offered a deep bow to Freya and Hnoss. Then, with surprising grace, it slipped between the sentinel trees and vanished into the forest beyond, the faint glow of its precious cargo visible for a few moments before disappearing among the shadows. Do you think it will return? Hnoss asked, coming to stand beside her mother. Freya nodded, gazing after the departed spirit with fond eyes. Curiosity is a powerful force, especially when met with kindness rather than punishment. Yes, I believe our little friend will visit again, though perhaps with better manners next time. A sudden shaft of moonlight illuminated them both, catching in Hnoss's pale hair and reflecting from Freya's Brisingamen necklace in a cascade of rainbow sparks. The garden seemed to hold its breath for a moment as the moonlight intensified, focusing through gaps in the standing stones to touch specific plants throughout the glade. Ah, Freya murmured. The alignment progresses. she turned to her daughter with a smile. "Shall we continue our work? The convergence approaches, and there is much yet to prepare." Together, they moved through the garden again, this time focusing on plants touched by the moonbeams. Each required different care. Some needed only acknowledgement, others gentle pruning or additional water, and a few received whispered incantations that caused them to shift and change in subtle ways, aligning their energies with the cosmic patterns forming above. As they worked, more creatures appeared, drawn by the increasing flow of power through the garden. Tiny humanoid figures with dragonfly wings flitted between flowers, their bodies glowing with internal light. Small, rabbit-like beings with scales instead of fur emerged from burrows at the garden's edge to nibble respectfully at specific leaves after seeking permission with elaborate bows. Even a young fox with multiple tails slipped into the glade, curling up near the standing stones as if drawn to their humming energy. None disturbed the work of goddess and daughter. All seemed to understand the importance of what transpired, content to observe and absorb the harmonious energies being channeled and balanced. "Mother," Nos said softly as they knelt beside a pool where water lilies from Alfheim floated, their petals changing color with each ripple. "Do you think the balance can be maintained indefinitely? Or will there come a time—" She trailed off, perhaps reluctant to voice concerns about distant futures. Freya considered the question as she trailed her fingers through the enchanted water, sending gentle ripples across its surface. The lilies responded by shifting from silver to gold to palest blue. "All things change, daughter, even the 9 realms, even the gods." Her voice held neither sadness nor fear, only acceptance of a truth as old as existence itself. "Our task is not to prevent change, but to ensure it unfolds with as much harmony as possible, to tend the garden of existence as we tend these plants, with attention and care and respect for the web that connects all living things." Nos nodded, absorbing her mother's wisdom. "And when change comes that seems destructive, the prophecies speak of endings as well as beginnings." Freya smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of moonlight hair behind her daughter's ear. "Even in winter, when plants appear dead and the earth lies dormant, life continues beneath the surface, gathering strength for renewal. Perhaps the greatest changes follow similar patterns, beyond our current understanding." She gestured around the garden, where life flourished in countless forms under the light of moon and stars. "This is what I believe, that love and beauty and connection endure, even when their forms transform. And so we tend our garden, both literal and metaphorical, creating spaces where balance can be maintained and harmony fostered." A particularly bright shaft of moonlight suddenly illuminated the pool before them, causing the water lilies to burst into synchronized bloom, their petals opening wider than seemed possible, revealing centers that contained what looked like miniature galaxies, complete with swirling stars and cosmic dust. "Ah!" Freya breathed, genuine wonder in her voice despite her countless years of tending this garden. Perfect alignment with Alfheim's central star, right on time. She reached into a pouch at her waist and withdrew a handful of crystalline seeds, each no larger than a dewdrop, but containing rainbow swirls within. With practiced precision, she scattered them across the pool's surface, where they floated briefly before sinking between the lilies to the pool's bottom. "What will grow from those?" Henas asked, watching as the seeds began to glow beneath the water. "Something new," Freya replied with a smile that held mysteries as deep as the night sky. "Something born of this particular alignment, this specific moment in the great cycle. We will discover its nature together when it emerges." As if in response to her words, a shooting star streaked across the sky above them, its light reflecting in the pool and in Freya's eyes. Throughout the garden, plants seemed to sigh collectively, releasing fragrances that mingled in the night air. A symphony of scents as complex and harmonious as the most beautiful music. Njos closed her eyes, breathing deeply of this aromatic chorus. "It smells like everything," she whispered. "Joy and sorrow, beginnings and endings, all the moments in between." "Yes," Freya agreed, her own eyes drifting closed as she savored the garden's response to the cosmic energies flowing through it. "That is the scent of balance, daughter. Of life in all its complexity, neither denied nor diminished, but accepted and honored." They remained thus for several breaths, simply experiencing the moment in its fullness. Then, with synchrony born of long practice, both opened their eyes and rose to continue their work. The night was only half done, and many plants still required attention before the moon reached its highest point. As they moved to a section where rare fungi from Svartalfheim grew in patterns that mirrored constellations, a new sound reached them. Soft footsteps, approaching from the forest path, accompanied by gentle humming. Freya smiled in recognition of the voice. "It seems Gersemi found time to join us after all," she said to Hnas, who returned her smile with one of equal warmth. Moments later, the younger daughter of Freya entered the glade. Her appearance similar to her sister's, but with subtle differences. Her hair was a shade darker, like honey rather than moonlight, and her movements were quicker, more energetic. She carried a small bundle wrapped in green cloth, which she presented to her mother with a graceful curtsy that was half serious, half playful. "Father sends his regards," Jemmy said, "and this contribution to your garden. He discovered it during his wanderings in the outermost branches of Yggdrasil." Freya accepted the bundle, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a seed pod, unlike any she had seen before. It pulsed with inner light that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue, and tiny filaments extended from its surface like reaching fingers, moving slightly as if testing the air. "Fascinating," she murmured, examining the strange life form with respectful curiosity. "Did he say where exactly it was found?" Gersini shook her head. "Only that it grew where starlight pools in hollows of the world tree's bark, far from any known realm." She looked around the garden, noting the increased activity of magical creatures and the intensified glow of the standing stones. "The convergence progresses well?" "Indeed," Nos answered, embracing her sister in welcome. "Though we missed your particular touch with the dream roses, they've been rather shy tonight." "Then I shall attend to them straight away," Gersemi declared, moving toward the section where those temperamental flowers grew. Dream roses were notoriously particular about who tended them, sometimes folding their petals tightly closed if approached by anyone whose dreams were troubled or chaotic. For reasons neither sister fully understood, they responded best to Gersemi's care. Freya watched her daughters with quiet joy as she contemplated where best to plant the mysterious seed pod. The garden had areas specifically designed for experimental growth where unknown specimens could develop without risk to established plants. After careful consideration, she selected a spot near the standing stones where energies converged from multiple realms, a place of balance where the strange new life would receive diverse influences rather than being dominated by any single pattern. As she knelt to prepare the soil, the fox with multiple tails approached, watching with evident interest. Unlike many magical creatures, this one showed no fear of the goddess, settling beside her with the confident air of an equal rather than a subject. "Well met, shapeshifter," Freya said without looking up from her work. "It has been some time since you graced my garden." The fox's form shimmered slightly, its edges becoming momentarily indistinct before resolving again. "The convergence calls to all who walk between worlds," it replied, in a voice that was neither wholly masculine nor feminine, but something altogether its own. "Even those who rarely answer such summons." Freya nodded, unsurprised by either the fox's speech or its implied nature. Shapeshifters were rare but known entities in the Nine Realms, beings who could cross boundaries of form and essence that remained fixed for most others. They tended to avoid gods and mortals alike, preferring solitude and the company of their own enigmatic kind. "Your presence honors us," she said, completing her preparation of the soil and gently placing the pulsing seed pod within the small hollow she had created. "Though I wonder what specifically drew you to this place on this night." The fox watched as Freya covered the seed pod with a light layer of soil mixed with crushed crystals and what appeared to be dust from fallen stars. Its multiple tails swayed in a pattern too complex to be random, yet too subtle to easily interpret. "Curiosity," it answered finally, "and perhaps concern. The walls between worlds grow thin, old patterns shift, new growth emerges." It nodded toward the freshly planted seed pod, some of it from beyond the known branches of the world tree. Freya sat back on her heels, giving the shapeshifter her full attention now. "You have knowledge of this specimen." "Not knowledge. Intuition." The fox's eyes gleamed with inner light that matched the pulsing rhythm of the buried seed pod. "It dreams of stars unlike those that shine over any of the Nine Realms. It carries patterns from elsewhere." "Is it dangerous?" Freya asked, not with fear but with the practical concern of a gardener assessing a new plant's potential impact on established growth. The fox tilted its head, considering. "All new things hold potential for both creation and destruction. That is not for me to judge." Its gaze met Freya's directly. "But I believe your garden is the right place for it to unfold, whatever its nature. Few others would recognize the proper balance of nurture and boundary, freedom and limitation." Freya nodded, accepting both the compliment and the implicit responsibility. "I will watch it closely as it grows." "As will I," the fox replied, settling more comfortably beside the planting site. "If you permit." "You are welcome here," Freya said, recognizing the value of having such a being's perspective as the strange plant developed. "Though I confess surprise at your interest." The fox's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "The convergence awakens curiosity in all beings, goddess. Even those who usually prefer to observe from afar." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft exclamation from across the garden. Freya looked up to see Gersemi standing amid the dream roses, which had fully opened in her presence. Each bloom emitted a subtle glow that formed shapes above its center, images from dreams that shifted and transformed like clouds in a gentle wind. Collectively, they created a tapestry of interconnected visions floating above the flower bed. "They're showing something new," Gersemi called, wonder in her voice. "Something I've never seen before." Freya rose gracefully, nodding a brief farewell to the fox before crossing to join her daughter. Hnos was already there, watching the dream images with equal fascination. Above the roses, scenes played out in luminous detail. A tree larger than any in the known realms, its branches extending beyond sight, stars forming patterns unknown to even the most knowledgeable astronomers of Asgard. beings of light and shadow moving together in complex dances, and woven throughout a sense of anticipation, of approaching transformation. The convergence affects even dreams, Freya observed, though she too was intrigued by the novelty of these visions. Dream roses typically reflected what already existed in the collective unconscious of sleeping minds across the realms. These images suggested something else, perhaps possibilities not yet realized, or awareness from beyond known boundaries. Is it prophecy? Nues asked softly. Freya considered this as she watched the floating images shift and transform. Not in the sense of fixed future events, she said finally. More like potential, seeds of what might grow given the right conditions. She glanced back toward where the mysterious seed pod now rested beneath the soil. Like our new addition. The three women stood in contemplative silence, watching as the dream visions gradually faded with the rose's natural cycle. Around them, the garden continued its nighttime activities. Creatures tending to their own purposes, plants responding to the cosmic energies flowing through the glade, standing stones humming their ancient harmonies. Freya felt a deep contentment despite, or perhaps because of, the hints of great change that had appeared throughout the night. Change was, after all, essential to growth. Without it, even the most beautiful garden would stagnate, its initial harmony eventually decaying into imbalance. The key was not to prevent change, but to tend it with wisdom and care. Come, she said to her daughters as the moon reached its zenith directly above the center of the glade. It is time for the midnight blessing. Together, the three moved to stand within the circle of standing stones, which now glowed so brightly that they cast long shadows across the garden. Freya took her place at the northern point, Nos at the east, and Gersimi at the west, leaving the southern position open, a space traditionally reserved for those not physically present, but connected in spirit. Freya lifted her hands, her Brisingamen necklace catching and transforming the moonlight into cascades of color that flowed down her arms like liquid rainbows. Her daughters mirrored her gesture, their own energies visible as gentle auras surrounding their forms. We stand in the between places, Freya began, her voice resonating with power that remained gentle despite its depth. Between night and day, sleeping and waking, ending and beginning, we honor the balance that sustains all life across the realms. We tend what grows in darkness, Panos continued, her tone like clear water flowing over stones, nurturing roots that reach deep, supporting what will rise toward light. We guard the dreams that seed tomorrow, Jasoni added, her voice bright as morning dew, protecting the delicate moments of transformation. Together, all three spoke in perfect unison. We maintain the garden of existence, knowing that all things, gods and mortals, giants and spirits, plants and stars, share in the great web of being. As it was, as it is, as it shall be, informs both familiar and new. As the final words were spoken, the moonlight focused into a perfect column that connected the sky to the center of the stone circle. Within this column, energies from throughout the garden and beyond seemed to gather, swirling in patterns too complex for any but divine perception to fully comprehend. For a breathless moment, the entire glade was suspended in perfect stillness. Every leaf, every creature, even the air itself seemed to pause in reverent attention. Then, with a soft sound like a distant chord struck on cosmic strings, the gathered energies dispersed outward in a gentle wave, flowing through plants and beings alike before extending beyond the garden's boundaries into the greater world. The midnight blessing was complete. Energies balanced, connections strengthened, new possibilities acknowledged and integrated into the ongoing flow of existence. The garden had fulfilled its purpose for another night in the long countdown toward convergence. As the extraordinary moment passed, normal activity gradually resumed throughout the glade. Creatures returned to their various tasks, plants settled into their natural rhythms, and the standing stone's glow subsided to a more subdued radiance. Freya looked at her daughters with quiet pride. "Well done," she said simply. "The balance holds. For now." Jacima added with a hint of her characteristic energy, returning after the solemnity of the blessing. "For now is all any gardener can ask," Freya replied with a smile. "The future unfolds as it will. Our task is to tend what is before us, with attention and care." She turned her gaze across the garden, taking in the beauty and complexity that had developed over countless centuries of patient tending. From the smallest fungi to the tallest flowering plants, from the most ephemeral spirits to beings of ancient power like the watching fox, each had its place in the intricate balance. Change would come, as it always did. New growth would emerge, some expected, some surprising, some perhaps challenging to integrate. But that was the nature of gardens, both literal and metaphorical. They lived through constant transformation, death giving way to life, familiar patterns occasionally disrupted by novelty that eventually found its own place in the greater whole. In this understanding, Freya found not resignation but contentment. The night's work was done, the garden thrived, the stars continued their eternal dance above, indifferent yet connected to all that transpired below. And here, in this sacred space between worlds, the goddess of love and her daughters continued their quiet, essential tending. Unnamed in most tales of gods and heroes, unheralded by skalds and poets, yet fundamental to the harmony of existence itself. Such was the way of gardeners throughout the realms. Their greatest achievements often invisible to casual observers, but vital to the flourishing of all life. And in this knowledge, Freya found a peace deeper than glory, more enduring than fame. The garden grew, the balance held, the stars shone down in silent witness. It was enough. A lone figure walked the winding dirt path that connected the scattered settlements of Midgard. His pace was unhurried, deliberate, each step placed with the certainty of one who had traveled countless roads across many lifetimes. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, casting his face in shadow despite the gentle glow of the waning moon overhead. A blue-grey cloak, worn at the edges but still sturdy, hung from his broad shoulders, stirring slightly in the cool night breeze. To any who might have observed him on that quiet evening, he would have appeared as nothing more than an aging wanderer, perhaps a skald seeking new tales, or a trader between market days. Few would have guessed that beneath the simple disguise walked Odin himself, all-father and ruler of Asgard, wandering the realm of mortals as he had done countless times through the long centuries. Tonight he traveled not for any great purpose that would be recorded in the sagas of gods or men. There was no artifact to retrieve, no hero to test, no cosmic knowledge that required immediate seeking. Instead, he walked the earthen paths of Midgard for a simpler, quieter reason: to remember, to observe, to understand the beings whose lives were so brief yet so vibrant compared to the long existence of the Aesir. The moon cast silver light across open fields where wheat and barley stood tall, nearly ready for harvest. Their stalks whispered secrets to one another as the gentle wind passed among them, creating patterns of movement like waves across a golden sea. Odin paused at the crest of a small hill, his single eye, the right one, the one he had not sacrificed to the well of Erd for wisdom, taking in the peaceful landscape. Far in the distance, perhaps a league away, the twinkling lights of a village were visible. Small flames of hearth fires and oil lamps that created a constellation of human presence against the darkened countryside. Odin turned his steps toward these lights, not yet certain if he would enter the settlement or merely observe from afar. Both approaches had their merits, their different kinds of wisdom to offer. As he walked, Odin's thoughts drifted to his many previous journeys through Midgard. He had witnessed the rise and fall of countless human settlements, had watched as nomadic tribes became villages, villages became towns, towns grew into cities. He had seen how mortals adapted to their brief existence with remarkable creativity and resilience. The night around him was alive with subtle sounds, the rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth beside the path, the distant hooting of an owl on its nightly hunt, the soft chorus of crickets singing their eternal summer song. Odin absorbed these sounds without conscious attention, his senses attuned to the patterns of life in ways that transcended ordinary perception. His steps carried him closer to the village, and more details came into view. It was a modest settlement of perhaps 20 dwellings, surrounded by cultivated fields and pastures where livestock grazed during daylight hours. The buildings were simple but well crafted, structures of timber and stone with thatched roofs, built to withstand the harsh northern winters that would come all too soon. A stream wound its way along the village's eastern edge, its water reflecting moonlight in scattered silver fragments. Near its banks stood a watermill, its wheel now still in the quiet night. Beyond the village to the north and west stretched a dense forest, its edge a dark line against the star-filled sky. As Odin approached, he noticed that despite the late hour, there was unusual activity in the village. Several figures moved between buildings, carrying torches whose flames danced and flickered in the darkness. Their movements suggested purpose rather than leisure. Something had disrupted the normal rhythms of nighttime in this small community. Odin adjusted his path slightly, no longer heading directly for the village center, but instead toward a small rise that would allow him to observe without immediately being noticed. As he did, the wind shifted, bringing new sounds and scents. The nervous bleating of sheep gathered in a pen, the low voices of concerned villagers, and, faint but unmistakable, the howling of wolves from the forest edge. Now, understanding the cause of the village's midnight activity, Odin paused to consider. Wolves were neither good nor evil in the great balance of things. They were simply predators following their nature, seeking sustenance as all living beings must. Yet for humans whose livelihood depended on their livestock, wolves represented a genuine threat that could mean the difference between winter survival and starvation. The howls came again, closer now, their eerie harmony rising and falling in the night air. Odin counted at least 5 distinct voices in that wild chorus, a substantial pack, likely driven by hunger to risk approaching human settlement. In the sheep pen visible at the village edge, the animals huddled together in instinctive defense, their anxiety palpable even at this distance. Several villagers had gathered near the pen, holding torches and improvised weapons. Pitchforks, axes, wooden staves. Their postures spoke of determination tinged with fear. These were farmers, not warriors. They would defend their livelihood, but the prospect of facing a wolf pack brought understandable trepidation. Odin could have simply continued on his way. The natural struggle between predator and prey, between human settlements and wild things was an ancient dance that would continue long after this particular night. Yet something held him there. Perhaps curiosity about how these specific mortals would respond to adversity, or perhaps a more personal inclination he rarely acknowledged, even to himself, moving with the silent grace that belied his apparent age. Odin descended from the rise and approached the village from an angle that would bring him near the threatened sheep pen. He adjusted his demeanor subtly as he walked, slouching his shoulders slightly and adopting the gait of an elderly traveler. The disguise was as much in movement and bearing as in his physical appearance. The villagers noticed his approach when he was still some distance away. Two men with torches turned toward him, raising their lights to better see the unexpected arrival. Wariness crossed their weather-lined faces. A stranger appearing at night during a moment of crisis naturally aroused suspicion. "Ho there, traveler," called the older of the two, a stocky man with a grey-streaked beard and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of farming. "You choose an odd hour to visit our village?" Odin raised a hand in peaceful greeting, keeping his approach slow and unthreatening. "The road keeps its own hours, good sir, as do these wolves whose songs seem to concern you." His voice was pitched deliberately, lower than his true godly tones, with the slight roughness of age and much travel. The mention of wolves caused several villagers to glance nervously toward the forest edge, where shadows moved between the trees. The howling had stopped, a silence more concerning than the earlier cries. "Aye, the beasts have been growing bolder these past nights," said a younger man, gripping a pitchfork with white-knuckled hands. "Took 2 lambs 3 nights past, though we thought we'd scared them off for good. Hungry times make for bold hunters," Odin observed, coming to stand at the edge of the group. "The summer has been dry to the north, game grows scarce." The older farmer studied him with narrowed eyes. "You've come from the northern reaches, then? Past the great fjords?" Odin nodded, the movement causing moonlight to briefly illuminate his face beneath the wide hat brim, though not enough to reveal the empty socket where his left eye had once been. "I have walked many paths. The wolves follow the deer follow the new growth, and all follow the rhythms laid down since the world's formation." Something in his tone, a depth of certainty, perhaps, or an echo of ancient knowledge, caused several of the villagers to exchange glances. In times of uncertainty, wisdom from any source was valued, even from a mysterious wayfarer. Before conversation could continue, a young boy of perhaps 8 winters dashed up to the group, his eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. "They're coming closer," he exclaimed, pointing toward the forest edge. "I counted 6 at least, moving through the shadows." "Get back to the hall, Leaf," the older farmer said firmly. "This is no place for children." The boy, Leif, opened his mouth as if to protest, but fell silent when his gaze fell upon Odin. Unlike the adults, who saw only a travel-worn wanderer, the child seemed to perceive something more. His eyes widened slightly, and he took an unconscious step closer, curiosity overcoming caution. Odin returned the boy's gaze with a subtle nod, then turned his attention to the forest edge. Indeed, shapes were now visible moving in the tall grass between the trees and the village, grey shadows flowing like water, their movements coordinated with the precision that made wolf packs such effective hunters. "They will test your defenses first," Odin said quietly, addressing the gathered villagers but watching the approaching predators, looking for weakness, for gaps they might exploit. "They are hungry but not desperate, not yet willing to risk serious injury. "And how would a wanderer know the ways of wolves so well?" asked a woman who had joined the group, a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. Odin smiled slightly, though the expression remained largely hidden in the shadow of his hat. "One learns much on the road, good lady. Wolves and I have observed each other across many winters." The pack had now emerged fully from the forest cover, spreading out in a loose formation as they approached the sheep pen. The animals inside bleated in terror, pressing against the far fence in a futile attempt to escape the predator's sight. In the moonlight, the wolves' eyes gleamed with an almost supernatural light, yellow-green orbs of focused hunger. The villagers raised their torches and weapons, shouting and stamping to create noise they hoped would drive the wolves away. For a moment it seemed to work. The lead wolf, a large male with a silver-tipped coat, hesitated, ears flattening against his skull at the cacophony. But hunger was a powerful motivator, and after that brief pause, the pack continued its advance. They moved with greater caution now, but still with clear purpose. The largest wolf began circling toward the weakest point in the pen's fence, where years of weather had caused the wood to bow slightly. Odin watched this unfolding drama with the perspective of one who had witnessed countless such encounters throughout the ages. He saw the determination in the villager's stance, the calculation in the wolves' approach, the fear in the prey animal's movements. All were playing roles as old as life itself, the eternal dance of survival that connected all living things in a complex web of necessity and consequence. For a moment, he considered simply observing, allowing events to unfold according to the strength and will of the participants. Such was often his way when wandering incognito through the realms, to witness without interference, gathering knowledge through observation rather than involvement. But then his gaze fell upon young Leaf, who had disobeyed his elder's command to return to safety and instead remained at the edge of the group, watching the approaching wolves with a mixture of fear and fascination. In the boy's expression, Odin recognized something he had seen countless times throughout the long centuries, the awakening of understanding about the world's fundamental nature, the simultaneous terror and wonder of recognizing one's place in the great pattern. Perhaps it was this recognition that prompted Odin to act, or perhaps something more personal. A flicker of memory from his own youth, eons past. Whatever the reason, he stepped forward, moving past the line of villagers toward the approaching wolf pack. "Stand aside, old man," called one of the younger farmers. "They'll tear you apart." Odin paid no heed to the warning. He walked with measured steps toward the wolves, his posture straightening subtly as he moved. Though he maintained his mortal disguise, something in his bearing shifted, a hint of his true nature emerging like moonlight from behind thin clouds. The lead wolf halted its advance, yellow eyes fixed on this strange human who approached without weapon or show of fear. A low growl rumbled from its throat, part warning, part challenge. The other wolves followed their leader's example, stopping their forward movement but remaining tensed for action. Odin stopped several paces from the lead wolf. He raised one hand slowly, palm outward in a gesture that was neither threatening nor submissive. With his other hand, he reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew something small that caught the moonlight in a brief silver flash. "You seek to feed your pack," Odin said, his voice low and carrying. Though he spoke in the human tongue, the words seemed to hold meaning for the wolves, whose ears pricked forward attentively. "This is the way of all living things, and no shame lies in hunger's demands." From behind, the villagers watched in astonished silence. Even the sheep had grown quiet, as if sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding before them. Odin knelt slowly, placing whatever he had retrieved from his pouch upon the ground between himself and the wolf pack. Then he stepped back, making a subtle gesture with his hand, not quite a rune sign, but reminiscent of one. "There are deer aplenty 3 valleys east of here," he continued, still in that same measured tone. "The streams run clear there, and few humans hunt those woods. Better hunting for your kind, where no blood need be shed in conflict." The lead wolf approached what Odin had placed on the ground, a small object that gleamed silver in the moonlight. The animal sniffed it cautiously, then lifted its head to regard the disguised god with an almost uncanny intelligence. For a long moment, wolf and wanderer gazed at one another in silent communication. Then, with a soft whuff that might almost have been acknowledgement, the wolf turned away. It made no sound, but the pack responded as one, turning to follow their leader as he trotted back toward the forest edge. Within moments, they had vanished among the trees, grey shadows melting into deeper darkness. The villagers remained frozen in place, torch flames flickering in the night breeze, expressions of disbelief etched upon their faces. It was the boy, Leif, who broke the silence, darting forward to where Odin still stood, watching the place where the wolves had disappeared. "How did you do that?" the child asked, voice filled with wonder. "Did you speak to them? What did you put on the ground?" Odin looked down at the boy, a gentle smile crossing his weathered features. In that moment, with moonlight illuminating his face, the child caught a glimpse of something extraordinary. Not quite the empty eye socket that would have revealed Odin's true identity, but perhaps a momentary gleam of ancient knowledge in his remaining eye, a depth of wisdom no mortal wanderer could possess. "Animals understand more than humans often credit," Odin replied, his voice pitched for the boy's ears alone. "They recognize respect when it is offered. As for what I placed there," he gestured toward the ground where a small silver amulet lay, carved with intricate patterns too fine for mortal crafting. "A token to mark a boundary, nothing more." Before Leif could question further, the villagers approached, the older farmer in the lead. His expression wavered between gratitude and suspicion, the natural response of a practical man confronted by something beyond ordinary explanation. "I've never seen wolves turn away from easy prey like that," he said, studying Odin with newfound respect. "You have our thanks, stranger, whatever your methods." He extended a calloused hand. "I am Halvar, elder of this village." Odin clasped the offered hand briefly. "I am called Vegtam on this road," he said, giving one of his many traveling names. "I seek no thanks. The wolves have gone to better hunting grounds, and your sheep remains safe. That is reward enough." The woman with the woolen shawl stepped forward. "Nonetheless, we owe you hospitality at the least. Night grows deep, and no traveler should sleep under stars when a hearth is offered." Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, suggested she sensed something unusual about their visitor, though she could not name what. Odin considered declining. His wanderings often took him far from human dwelling places, and he had no need for mortal comforts. But something in the genuine warmth of the offer, combined with his own desire to observe these particular humans further, led him to incline his head in acceptance. "Gladly will I share your hearth until morning light," he said, "and perhaps exchange tales, as is the custom of the road." Young Leif could scarcely contain his excitement at this development, practically bouncing as the group turned toward the village center. "Will you tell stories of your travels? Have you seen the great sea serpents or the fire giants of the southern mountains?" The questions tumbled out in an eager stream. "Leif," His mother, the woman with the shawl, admonished gently, "Our guest may wish for rest rather than endless questioning." "Questions are the seeds from which wisdom grows," Odin said, his tone light yet somehow profound. "I do not mind them, though answers must sometimes wait for the proper time and place." The group made their way to the village's central hall, a long wooden building with a peat fire burning in a central hearth, its smoke rising to escape through a hole in the thatched roof. Though modest by the standards of royal halls or divine dwellings, it held a comfortable warmth and the particular beauty of human craftsmanship. Hand-carved pillars decorated with intricate patterns, woven tapestries depicting local stories, sturdy benches polished by generations of use. Several other villagers were gathered inside, having remained to tend the fire and prepare food while the others confronted the wolf threat. They looked up with curious expressions as the group entered with their unusual guest. "The wolves have gone," Halvar announced to murmurs of relief. "Thanks to our visitor here, who turned them away with neither blood nor battle." He gestured toward Odin, who had removed his hat but kept his cloak wrapped around him, the deep hood still providing shadow that obscured his features. A young woman approached with a wooden cup filled with mead, not the divine brew of Asgard, but the honest product of mortal beekeeping and brewing. "Please, warm yourself with this," she offered. "It is our best, saved for honored guests and special occasions." Odin accepted the cup with a nod of thanks, taking a small sip of the sweet liquid. Though far simpler than the mead served in Valhalla's golden cups, it carried its own charm, the particular flavor of mortal crafting, of care taken despite limited resources and brief lifespans. "It honors the bees that made it," he said appreciatively, causing the young woman to smile at the unusual compliment. As the immediate concerns of the wolf encounter faded, the villagers settled into the comfortable routines of hospitality. Food was brought forth, simple fare of bread, cheese, and dried meat, but offered with genuine generosity. Odin ate sparingly, more out of respect for the gesture than from any physical need. Gradually, as often happened in such gatherings, conversation turned to stories. An elderly woman, her face lined with the passage of many winters, began a tale familiar throughout the northern lands. The story of how the god Thor had once disguised himself as a bride to retrieve his stolen hammer from the giant Thrym. Odin listened with well-concealed amusement, noting how the tale had changed in its retelling through mortal generations. Some elements had been exaggerated, others forgotten entirely, yet the essence remained recognizable. Such was the way of stories passed from one brief life to another. They evolved, like living things, adapting to the needs and understanding of each new generation. When the elder finished her tale to appreciative murmurs, eyes turned expectantly to their guest. It was custom for travelers to share news or stories in exchange for hospitality, and clearly these isolated villagers hoped for fresh tales from the wider world. "Will you favor us with a story, Vegtam?" Halvar asked, settling onto a bench with a cup of mead cradled in his work-worn hands. Odin considered for a moment. As the Allfather, repository of knowledge from throughout the 9 realms, he possessed countless tales that would enthrall these mortals, stories of the creation of the worlds, of wars between gods and giants, of magical treasures and heroic deeds. Yet he sensed that what these particular humans might value most was something different, something more relevant to their daily lives and ongoing struggles. "I will tell you not of grand battles or mighty treasures," he began, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that caused even the restless children to grow still and attentive, "but of a simple wisdom I observed in a village much like yours, many leagues to the east, in a valley where 3 rivers meet." He spoke then of a community that had faced several years of poor harvests, how they had initially turned against one another in fear and blame before finding a better path. He described how they had developed new ways of sharing resources, of supporting those most vulnerable, of adapting their farming methods to changing conditions. They discovered that survival lay not in each family hoarding what little they had, Odin said, his single visible eye reflecting the hearthfire's glow, but in strengthening the bonds between them. The wisdom they found was older than any runestone, yet ever new in its application, that humans achieved their greatest strength not in isolation, but in connection. Though he spoke of ordinary matters rather than mythic adventures, the villagers listened with rapt attention. Perhaps they sensed the deeper currents beneath his simple words, or perhaps the tale simply resonated with their own experiences and concerns. Either way, when he fell silent, the hall remained quiet for several heartbeats before conversation gradually resumed, now centered on his story and its potential lessons for their own community. Young Leif, who had been sitting cross-legged near Odin's feet throughout the tale, looked up with eyes that seemed older than his years. "The village in your story," he said quietly. "It's real, isn't it? Not just a teaching tale." Odin met the child's gaze directly. "Yes, all places I speak of are real. All people once lived and breathed as you do now. And they survived their hard times." "They did," Odin confirmed, "though not without change, for change is the one constant across all realms and all lives." The boy considered this, his small face serious in the flickering firelight. "Like the wolves," he said finally, "they change where they hunt because you showed them a better path." Odin nodded, genuinely impressed by the child's insight. "Precisely so. Wisdom often lies in knowing when to hold fast and when to seek new paths." As the night deepened around the village hall, conversation gradually quieted. Families with young children drifted away to their own dwellings, while others stretched out on benches or bedrolls near the hearth. The rituals of a day's end and night's embrace were as familiar to Odin as they were foreign to his true experience. These brief patterns of mortal existence, these daily surrenders to the necessity of rest. Halvar approached as the hall grew quieter, offering a clean blanket and a place near the fire. "Rest well, Vegtam. We've little enough to offer a man who saved our flock, but what we have is yours to share." "Your hospitality honors your people," Odin replied. "I require little in the way of comfort." When Halvar had withdrawn, Odin settled onto a bench near the hearth, not truly needing sleep, but willing to observe the mortal custom. The fire had burned low, casting the hall in a gentle amber glow that softened the edges of wooden beams and sleeping forms. Outside, night creatures sang their subtle songs, and somewhere far distant, perhaps the wolf pack had found the hunting grounds he had directed them toward. Odin allowed his thoughts to drift, reflecting on what he had observed in this simple village. These mortals possessed a resilience that many of the Aesir, for all their power and longevity, might learn from. They faced each day knowing their lives were brief, their control over circumstances limited, yet they built, they planned, they cared for one another with a fierce determination that defied the temporary nature of their existence. In the quiet hours before dawn, as most of the village slept, Odin became aware of a small presence nearby. Young Leif had crept from his sleeping place to sit cross-legged on the floor near Odin's bench, apparently assuming the visitor was asleep. "You should be dreaming, young one," Odin said softly, causing the boy to start slightly. "I couldn't sleep," Leif whispered. "I keep thinking about the wolves and your story and..." He hesitated, then asked with childish directness, Who are you, really? You're not just a traveler, are you? In the dim light, Odin studied the child. This bright spark of mortal curiosity and intuition, this brief flame that would burn intensely before inevitably fading, as all mortal lives must. There was something in the boy that reminded him of countless heroes and seekers he had encountered through the ages. Those rare humans who glimpsed beyond the veil of ordinary perception. I am exactly what you see before you, Odin replied carefully. A wanderer on the roads of Midgard, seeking wisdom where it may be found. But the wolves listen to you, Lef persisted, and when you speak it feels like the child struggled to find words for an impression he could sense but not articulate. Like the world is listening too. Odin smiled slightly. Perhaps the world listens to all of us if we speak with truth and purpose. Even the youngest voice may carry far if it speaks from wisdom rather than mere noise. He reached into his cloak and withdrew a small object, a polished stone of unusual coloration with patterns of deep blue and grey that seemed to shift like clouds when turned in the light. Here, he said, offering it to the boy, a token to remember our conversation by. Leif accepted the stone with reverent hands, turning it to catch the faint light from the dying embers. It looks like the sky before a storm, he whispered. It is a seeing stone, Odin told him. Not magical in the way of sorcerers' tools, but special nonetheless. Look into its patterns when you face a difficult choice, and it may help you perceive connections not immediately visible. The boy clutched the stone tightly. Thank you, he said with simple sincerity. I'll keep it always. Now return to your rest, Odin instructed gently. Morning comes soon enough. After Leif had crept back to his sleeping place, Odin remained awake, watching as the fire's last embers pulsed with inner heat. He had given the boy no ordinary stone, though neither was it imbued with dramatic enchantment. It was simply a fragment from the base of Yggdrasil, the world tree, containing within its structure echoes of the connections that bound all realms and beings together. Whether it would truly guide the child's future choices or simply serve as a reminder of this night's encounter, its value would be determined by Leif himself. As the first pale hints of dawn lightened the sky outside, Odin rose silently from his bench. He gathered his few possessions, straightened his cloak, and replaced his wide-brimmed hat. Before any of the sleeping villagers stirred, he slipped from the hall into the cool morning air. The village was peaceful in these moments between night and day, dew glistening on thatched roofs, smoke rising lazily from banked hearth fires, roosters not yet awake to announce the sun's return. Odin paused briefly, committing this moment to memory, one small perfect instant in the endless flow of time, significant not for any great event, but for its very ordinariness. Near the sheep pen where the confrontation with the wolves had occurred, Odin knelt and placed his hand flat against the earth. He spoke no words aloud, but his touch conveyed something to the soil beneath. A subtle blessing, perhaps, or simply an acknowledgement of connection between the eternal and the ephemeral. Rising, he turned toward the east, where the lightening sky promised another day's journey. The road stretched before him, winding through fields and forests toward distant horizons. As Vegtam the Wanderer, he would continue his solitary observations, gathering the small wisdoms that mortals created in their brief but vibrant lives. Somewhere in the village behind him, a door creaked open. Odin did not turn to see who might have risen early enough to witness his departure. Some mysteries were best preserved. Some connections maintained through distance rather than proximity. The villagers would find their own meanings in the night's events, weaving them into the ongoing story of their community. With measured steps that belied his apparent age, Odin set forth upon the waiting road. Above him, the fading stars performed their eternal dance across the vault of heaven. Below, the earth accepted his footfalls with patient endurance. Between these constants, the wanderer moved forward, one more traveler in the great pattern that connected all things across the 9 realms. Behind him, the village began to stir with morning activities, a new day unfolding in its ordinary miracle. And perhaps, in a small dwelling near the central hall, a boy named Leaf held a strange blue-grey stone to the first light of dawn, watching as it seemed to capture the sky itself within its polished surface. Odin did not look back. The road called, and other villages waited, each with its own small wisdoms to share. In Asgard, matters of cosmic importance would eventually require his return and attention, but for now, cloaked in the simple disguise of a mortal traveler, the Allfather continued his quiet journey through the realm of humanity, observing, learning, and occasionally, when the moment called for it, offering gentle guidance along the way. Such had been his pattern since the worlds were young, and such it would remain until Ragnarok's final calling. For even the father of gods and men had things yet to learn from the brief, bright lives that flourished for a season in Midgard's fertile soil. And in that continuing education, perhaps, lay wisdom greater than any single being could claim, no matter how powerful or long-lived they might be. The sun's first direct rays touched the eastern horizon as Odin crested a distant hill, his silhouette momentarily outlined against the golden light before he descended the far slope and vanished from view. A wanderer once more, absorbed into the vast tapestry of the waking world. In the heart of Asgard, hidden from casual wanderers, yet never truly lost to those who needed its solace, lay a grove unlike any other in the 9 realms. Unlike the grand halls of Valhalla or the imposing throne room of Hlidskjalf, this sacred space celebrated no victories and displayed no symbols of power. Instead, it existed in perfect humble harmony, a sanctuary of peace in a cosmos often defined by struggle. The grove had no name that mortals knew. The Aesir simply called it the Glade of Solace, or sometimes Baldur's Rest, for it was here that the gentlest of the gods most often chose to dwell when not attending to other duties. The trees that encircled the grove were ancient beyond reckoning, their silver-barked trunks rising like pillars to support a canopy of leaves that shimmered between silver and gold depending on how the light touched them. These trees had witnessed the earliest days of creation yet showed no signs of aging or decay, their vitality as eternal as the gods themselves. Within this circle of sentinel trees spread a meadow of soft grass and countless wildflowers that bloomed regardless of season. Pink and white blossoms nodded on slender stems, releasing fragrances that calmed troubled minds and eased burdened hearts. Blue, star-shaped flowers clustered near the bases of the trees, their centers glowing with a gentle inner light as twilight approached. Yellow buds spiraled up around small stones scattered throughout the grove, opening and closing in rhythmic patterns that seemed to match the breathing of sleeping children. At the grove's center bubbled a spring of extraordinary clarity. Its waters emerged from between smooth white stones, forming a small pool before flowing outward in a meandering stream that eventually disappeared beneath the roots of the encircling trees. The water caught and amplified the available light, sending dancing reflections across the grove's interior and creating an atmosphere of gentle, ever-shifting illumination. It was here, in this haven of tranquility, that Balder often came when the weight of the world's sorrows, which he felt more keenly than most of his kin, became too heavy to bear alone. and it was here that he could most effectively offer the comfort and healing that was his particular gift among the Aesir. On this day that was neither summer nor autumn but some perfect moment between the two, Balder made his way along the hidden path that led to the grove. He walked at an unhurried pace, his footsteps making almost no sound on the moss-covered ground. Unlike Thor with his mighty hammer, or Odin with his ravens and spear, Balder carried no tokens of power or office. He needed none. The light that emanated from within him, a soft golden radiance that seemed to intensify the colors and beauty of everything it touched, was manifestation enough of his divine nature. Balder's face, fair beyond that of any other being in the 9 realms, wore an expression of thoughtful serenity. His eyes, the deep blue of a perfect summer sky, reflected both compassion and a hint of the sadness that always accompanied his gift of empathy. His hair, the color of ripe wheat touched by sunlight, was bound simply at the nape of his neck with a cord of braided silver. He wore a simple tunic of white linen, embroidered at the collar and cuffs with patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. A belt of woven gold threads encircled his waist, and from it hung a small pouch containing various items he used in his healing work. Herbs from distant realms, stones of special properties, and occasionally tokens left by those who had found peace in the grove and wished to express gratitude. As Balder approached the edge of the grove, the sentinel trees seemed to stir slightly, though no wind moved their branches. It was a greeting of sorts, an acknowledgement of his arrival by entities that existed in a state between plant and consciousness. Balder smiled gently, reaching out to brush his fingertips against the nearest silver bark in a reciprocal greeting. "Good day to you, ancient ones," he murmured. "May your roots drink deep and your branches reach ever skyward." The trees rustled again, their leaves creating a sound like distant, joyful laughter. Balder's presence always brought them pleasure, for his light nourished them in ways different from ordinary sunlight. Where the sun's rays fed their physical forms, Balder's radiance strengthened the subtle enchantments that gave them their unique properties and extended consciousness. Stepping between 2 of the sentinel trunks, Balder entered the grove proper. Immediately the quality of light changed around him, becoming softer, more diffuse, as if the air itself had transformed into a medium for gentle illumination. The wildflowers turned subtly toward him as he passed, like attentive faces following a beloved teacher's movements. At the central spring, Balder knelt and dipped his hands into the crystal waters. The liquid seemed to cling lovingly to his fingers, reluctant to fall back into the pool. He cupped a small amount and raised it to his lips, not from thirst, but out of respect for the spring's gift. The water tasted of nothing and everything, pure beyond description, yet somehow containing echoes of all that was good and wholesome throughout the realms. After this simple ritual of arrival, Balder settled on a smooth stone beside the pool. From experience, he knew that those who sought the grove's solace would find their way here when the time was right. He did not summon or direct, he simply made himself available, a lighthouse offering guidance to ships navigating stormy emotional seas. The twilight deepened around the grove, the sky visible through gaps in the canopy turning the deep blue of lapis lazuli. Stars began to appear, first singly, then in clusters and constellations familiar to all who dwelled in Asgard. Yet within the grove itself, the darkness never fully descended. Balder's presence ensured that a gentle luminosity remained, supplemented by the glowing centers of the blue starflowers and the reflective surface of the spring's pool. It was in this peaceful half-light that Balder first noticed he was no longer alone in the grove. At its far edge, partially concealed behind one of the sentinel trees, stood a figure radiating such profound distress that even at this distance, Boulder could feel the disharmony it brought to the grove's usual serenity. The newcomer made no move to approach, seeming either unable or unwilling to step fully into the sacred space. Boulder remained where he was, patient and undemanding. Force had no place in healing, and coercion, even the gentlest kind, would only drive away those most in need of solace. Gradually, as the stars continued their slow dance across the heavens above, the figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, or rather the spirit of one, who had once been a man in Midgard. His form was translucent but clearly defined, showing the appearance he had held in life. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the muscled build of a warrior, he wore the remnants of battle gear, a tunic of mail that appeared damaged on one side, leather braces on his wrists, and a sword belt from which no weapon hung. His hair and beard were wild and unkempt, his eyes haunted by memories that seemed to play continuously behind them like reflections in troubled water. Most telling was the swirling energy that surrounded him, not the expected golden radiance of an honored warrior bound for Valhalla, but a turbulent storm of greys and blacks that occasionally flashed with angry red. This was a spirit in turmoil, caught between worlds and unable to find peace in either. The warrior spirit hesitated at the edge of the central clearing, his gaze fixed on Boulder with a mixture of hope and despair that was painful to behold. When he spoke, his voice echoed strangely, as if coming from both nearby and very far away. They said you might hear me," he began haltingly. "That you listen even to those who," he faltered, unable or unwilling to complete the thought. Boulder rose from his stone seat, moving unhurriedly toward the troubled spirit. His radiance intensified slightly, not in a display of power, but as an instinctive response to the darkness surrounding the newcomer, like a hearth fire burning more brightly against encroaching cold. "I hear all who come to this grove," Boulder replied, his voice gentle, yet carrying clearly through the still air. "And all are welcome, regardless of their burdens or their pasts." He stopped a respectful distance from the spirit, close enough to converse comfortably, but not so near as to crowd or intimidate. "What name did you bear in life, friend?" The spirit seemed surprised by the simple courtesy of being asked his name, as if he had expected judgment before introduction. "Halvard," he answered after a moment. "Halvard Thorson of the Western Fjords." Boulder inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Well met, Halvard Thorson. I am Boulder." "I know who you are," Halvard replied, a flash of the red energy pulsing through his aura. "The bright one, the beloved, the perfect son." There was a bitterness in his tone that suggested these attributes, admirable though they were, somehow added to his distress rather than alleviating it. If Boulder took offense at the spirit's tone, he showed no sign of it. Instead, he gestured toward the spring at the center of the grove. "Will you sit with me a while, Halvard? The waters here have properties that soothe troubled thoughts." The warrior spirit hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Together they moved to the spring's edge. Boulder resumed his seat on the smooth stone while Halvard remained standing, too agitated to settle. The troubled energy around him caused ripples to form on the spring's surface, though no physical wind disturbed the grove. "You are between realms," Boulder observed after a moment of silence. "Neither in Midgard with the living, nor in the halls of the dead. This is an uncomfortable state for any soul." Halvard's form flickered briefly, like a flame in a sudden draught. "I cannot pass on," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him great effort. "I am denied Valhalla, yet cannot accept the alternative." "What holds you here?" Balder asked, though his perceptive eyes suggested he already sensed at least part of the answer. The warrior was silent for so long that it seemed he might not respond at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier hostility, revealing instead a profound weariness. "Shame," he said simply, "and things left undone." Balder nodded, understanding. Many warriors faced similar struggles at life's end, their self-judgment often harsher than any the gods might impose. "Will you tell me of these burdens?" Sometimes speaking them aloud lightens their weight. Halvard began to pace, his translucent form leaving trails of disturbed energy in the air behind him. "I was a renowned warrior in my clan," he began, the words emerging in short, painful bursts. "Led raids along the eastern shores, brought back wealth, glory, respect." His form flickered again, or so I believed, and this belief proved false, Balder prompted gently when Halvard fell silent again. The spirit made a sound that might have been a laugh in life, but now resembled a cry of pain. "My final raid. We attacked a settlement, small, seemingly undefended, easy plunder." His voice grew harder. "I led the charge, was first to breach their hall, and there I found—" He stopped, the energy around him swirling violently. "What did you find, Halvard?" Balder's voice remained calm, a steady anchor in the storm of the warrior's emotions. "Not warriors waiting with weapons," Halvard whispered. "Only women, children, elders. The men were away fishing. I had led my warriors against the defenseless." His form seemed to collapse in on itself slightly, the proud shoulders hunching. "Some of my men, they wanted to proceed as planned, take what valuables remained, take the women. I ordered them back to the ships, but in the confusion, fighting broke out." Balder listened without interruption or judgment, allowing the spirit to unburden himself at his own pace. "I tried to protect a child, a small boy who reminded me of my own son at that age. One of my men, in bloodlust or madness, struck out." Halvard's voice broke. "The child died in my arms, and then I felt a blade between my own ribs, thrust by one of my men, who saw me as betraying our purpose." "You died defending the innocent," Balder observed quietly. "Too late," the cry burst from Halvard with such force that the flowers nearby bent as if in a strong wind. "Too late to undo the attack I had led, too late to save the child, too late to return to my own family and confess what I had become." The red flashes in his aura grew more frequent, and so I wander. Denied Valhalla because my death came not in honorable battle but in self-loathing. Unable to join those in Helheim because I cannot accept an eternity of peaceful reflection when I deserve punishment. The turmoil surrounding Halvard had intensified during his confession, the dark energies now extending tendrils throughout the grove. Where they touched, flowers temporarily dimmed, and the perpetual twilight grew darker. It was not a deliberate assault on the sanctuary, but rather the natural effect of such profound spiritual distress. Balder observed these changes without alarm. Unlike some of his divine kin, he did not view disruption as an affront requiring immediate suppression. Instead, he recognized it as a necessary step in the healing process. Pain must be acknowledged before it can be released. "You judge yourself harshly, Halvard Thorson," he said after the spirit's agitation had somewhat subsided. "More harshly, perhaps, than the circumstances warrant. You did not see what I saw, Halvard responded bitterly. Did not do what I did. No, Balder agreed, but I see what you are, not merely what you were or what you did. He rose from his stone seat and approached the troubled spirit. May I show you something? Though clearly skeptical, Halvard nodded his assent. Balder led him to the edge of the spring's pool. The water, which had been disturbed by Halvard's emotional turbulence, gradually stilled as Balder knelt beside it. He gestured for the warrior spirit to join him. Look into the waters, Balder instructed. At first, Halvard saw only his own reflection, the translucent image of what he had been in life, now overlaid with the visual manifestation of his inner turmoil. But as Balder passed his hand over the pool's surface, the image changed. The water seemed to deepen, becoming a window rather than a mirror. Through this window, Halvard saw the settlement he had raided on his final day of life, but instead of the scene of confusion and violence he remembered, he saw what had happened after. Women tending to the wounded, children being comforted, and most surprisingly, a small memorial built for the fallen, including markers for Halvard and the few of his men who had died there. They honored your remains, Balder said softly. They recognized that you tried to prevent greater harm, even at the cost of your life. The scene in the pool shifted again, showing Halvard's home village. There, he saw his wife receiving news of his death. Her grief was evident, but there was also a strange pride in her bearing as she heard the full story from the survivors of the raid. How Halvard had turned against his own men to protect the innocent. Your name is spoken with respect, not shame, Balder continued. Not as a perfect hero, for no such being exists save in exaggerated tales, but as a man who found his conscience when it mattered most. A final shift in the pool showed something that made Halvard's spirit form tremble visibly. His son, now grown several years older than when Halvard had last seen him, teaching younger children how to fish from the shore near their village. As he helped a small boy untangle his line, he spoke words that seemed to rise from the water for Halvard to hear. Patience is the greatest strength. My father taught me that. He was a mighty warrior, but he valued patience and wisdom above all his battle skills. The images faded, leaving the pool once again clear and reflective. Halvard stared at its surface in stunned silence, the turbulent energy around him momentarily stilled by what he had witnessed. The past cannot be changed, Balder said gently. What was done remains done, but its meaning can transform with time and understanding. Your final actions redeemed much, Halvard Thorson, and your continued presence between realms serves no one, least of all those you left behind who honor your memory. How can I accept peace when that child is still dead by my actions? Halvard asked, though the question held genuine seeking now rather than defensive bitterness. You cannot undo his death, Balder acknowledged, but you can honor his life by accepting the lessons it taught you, even if they came too late for him. As they spoke, other subtle presences had begun to gather at the grove's edges. Spirits like Halvard, caught between worlds, drawn by the unique energy of healing that permeated this sanctuary. They maintained a respectful distance, waiting for their own moments of solace, yet taking comfort simply from being in proximity to the sacred space. Balder noticed these newcomers but did not draw attention to them, allowing Halvard the privacy of his personal reconciliation. The warrior spirit remained kneeling by the pool, his translucent hands now resting on its stone edge in a posture that suggested deep contemplation rather than despair. I don't know how to let go, Halvard admitted finally. I've carried this burden so long it has become part of me. Balder smiled with gentle understanding. The water here has properties beyond showing visions, he said. It can carry away what we willingly release into it. He cupped his hands, drawing a small amount of the spring's water into his palms. Here, hold out your hands. Though clearly uncertain, Halvard did as instructed, creating a bowl with his translucent fingers. Halvard did as in stately form, but remained cradled there, glowing faintly with an inner light. Speak into the water what you wish to release, Balder instructed. Then let it flow back to join the spring. Halvard stared at the glowing liquid in his hands for several heartbeats. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I release my shame. I release my self-hatred. I accept that I cannot change the past. I accept that my final act may have some meaning. As the words left his lips, the water in his hands began to absorb the dark energy that had surrounded him, drawing it in like cloth soaking up spilled wine. The liquid darkened momentarily, then cleared again, now pulsing with a steady, silvery light. Now return it to the spring, Balder said softly. Halvard tipped his hands, allowing the water to fall back into the pool. The moment it rejoined the larger body, ripples spread outward in perfect circles, carrying the transformed energy throughout the grove. Where these ripples touched the sentinel trees, their silver bark seemed to brighten. Where they passed beneath clusters of wildflowers, new buds began to form. A visible change had come over Halvard as well. The turbulent storm around his spirit form had calmed significantly, and though not entirely gone, the dark energy had been replaced by a softer, more muted aura. His features seemed more defined, his eyes clearer and more present. I feel lighter, he said, with evident wonder. Not free of regret, but no longer crushed beneath it. Balder nodded, pleased but not surprised. Healing is rarely instant or complete, he observed, but once begun, it creates its own momentum. As they spoke, a new presence entered the grove, not another troubled spirit, but a goddess whose regal bearing and profound beauty marked her clearly as one of the highest of the Aesir. Frigg, wife of Odin and mother of Balder, moved through the sacred space with practiced familiarity, acknowledging the waiting spirits with gentle nods as she passed. Unlike her son's simple attire, Frigg wore garments befitting her station, a gown of midnight blue embroidered with silver stars, and over it a mantle that seemed woven from moonlight itself. Her golden hair was arranged in elaborate braids, interwoven with strands of pearls, and around her neck hung a key, symbol of her authority over household and healers throughout the realms. Mother, Balder greeted her warmly, rising to embrace her as she reached the spring's edge. You honor the grove with your presence. Frigg returned her son's embrace with equal warmth. The hour grows late, she said, her voice melodious yet carrying a subtle note of authority. I thought you might appreciate company for the evening blessing. Balder's smile suggested this was a shared ritual they had performed many times before. Indeed, and our friend Halvard may benefit from witnessing it before he continues his journey. He turned to the warrior spirit. Will you stay a while longer? Halvard, clearly awed by Frigg's presence, could only nod in agreement. As twilight deepened into true night outside the grove, Frigg and Balder began a ceremony so subtle that it might not have appeared ceremonial at all to casual observation. They moved to opposite sides of the spring's pool, each kneeling upon a smooth white stone that seemed placed precisely for this purpose. Frigg drew from a fold in her gown a small silver dish which she placed on the water's surface. Rather than sinking, it floated perfectly still at the center of the pool. From another pocket, she produced a handful of what appeared to be seeds or small dried flowers, which she scattered across the dish. Balder, meanwhile, raised his hands above the pool, palms downward. The radiance that naturally emanated from him intensified, focusing into beams of golden light that touched the silver dish and its contents. Where this light fell, the scattered offerings began to transform, unfolding, blossoming, releasing fragrances that spread throughout the grove like invisible messengers. From light, life renews, Frigg intoned, her voice blending with the gentle sounds of the spring. From darkness, wisdom deepens. Between these poles, balance dwells. What was returns to what will be, Balder continued, the ritual words clearly familiar to him. What is lost finds new form. The cycle remains unbroken. Together they completed the blessing. In this sacred space between realms, we honor the eternal dance of becoming and release. May all who seek solace find it. May all who offer healing be sustained. As it was in the beginning, as it shall be beyond ending. As their voices faded, the flowers on the silver dish dissolved into pure light that spread across the water's surface before sinking slowly into its depths. The pool itself began to glow with a luminosity that rivaled the brightest stars overhead, casting the entire grove in a gentle radiance that somehow managed to illuminate without dispelling the peaceful shadows that gathered beneath the sentinel trees. Halvard watched this ritual with evident wonder, his spirit form now almost completely calm. The dark energy that had surrounded him earlier had diminished to mere traces, like the last wisps of storm clouds after rain has cleared the air. When the blessing was complete, Frigg turned her attention to the warrior spirit. Though her gaze was kind, it held a penetrating quality that suggested she saw far more than physical appearance. "You have carried a heavy burden, Halvard Thorson," she said, "and now you stand at a crossroads of spirit." "Aye, yes, my lady," Halvard replied, the deference in his tone entirely natural rather than forced. "Thanks to your son's guidance, I begin to see paths that were hidden from me before." Frigg nodded, unsurprised. "My son has a gift for illuminating what others cannot yet perceive in themselves." She approached the spirit, moving with the fluid grace that characterized all her actions. "May I offer a mother's perspective to complement his wisdom?" Halvard bowed his head in acceptance, clearly moved by the goddess's willingness to address his concerns personally. "You were a father in life," Frigg began, her tone conversational rather than oracular. "Tell me, when your young son made errors, even serious ones, what did you wish for him?" The question seemed to catch Halvard off guard. "I wished for him to learn from them," he answered after a moment's reflection. "To grow wiser, stronger in character, not to punish himself endlessly." Frigg prompted gently. "No, of course not. Self-flagellation teaches nothing beyond misery." A smile touched Frigg's lips. "Yet you deny yourself the same compassion you would have offered your child. Curious, is it not, how we demand perfection from ourselves, while understanding the necessity of growth and error in those we love?" Halvarth had no immediate response to this observation. The truth in Frigg's words had struck home, visibly affecting his spirit form. The last traces of turbulent energy surrounding him began to settle into a more harmonious pattern. "The dead child you mourn," Frigg continued, after allowing her previous words time to resonate. Do you imagine he dwells in hatred of you from beyond? I have assumed he must, Halvard admitted. Frigg shook her head, her expression gentle but firm. Children, especially those who pass young to the realms beyond, carry remarkable capacity for forgiveness. They understand, with a clarity many adults lose, that hatred serves no purpose in healing what was broken. She gestured toward the grove around them. In places where the veils between worlds grow thin, such as this grove, the truth of what lies beyond becomes more accessible. Listen with more than your ears, Halvard Thorson, and you may hear what has been waiting for you to be ready to receive it. The goddess stepped back, exchanging a meaningful glance with her son. Balder nodded in understanding and moved to stand beside the warrior spirit, a steadying presence as Halvard tentatively opened himself to the possibility Frigg had suggested. At first, there was only the peaceful sounds of the grove, the gentle bubbling of the spring, the soft rustling of leaves in the sentinel trees, the distant chorus of night birds. But gradually, as Halvard's spirit grew more receptive, another sound became perceptible. The clear, unmistakable laughter of a child at play. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, not with the haunting quality of a ghostly presence, but with the simple joy of a young soul at peace. There were no words, no direct message, simply that pure expression of delight that children across all realms share when engaged in the serious business of joyful discovery. Tears formed in Halvard's translucent eyes, an impossibility for ordinary spirits, but this was no ordinary place. He is happy? The question held equal parts wonder and lingering disbelief. Is beyond the constraints of mortal suffering, Balder confirmed. In the realms where children's spirits dwell, the hurts of Midgard fade quickly, replaced by the endless adventure of cosmic exploration. He does not define himself by how his life ended, but by the joy he experienced while living and continues to discover beyond. Halvard listened to the distant laughter a moment longer before it gradually faded, like the last notes of a beautiful song. When it had gone completely, he straightened his shoulders. A warrior's posture, but now without the burden of self-recrimination that had previously weighed him down. I think I am ready, he said, his voice stronger than it had been since entering the grove. Ready to move forward whatever awaits me. Frigg and Balder exchanged pleased glances. The choice of destination remains yours, Frigg told him. But now you choose with a clearer heart, unburdened by misconceptions about what you deserve. Halvard nodded, gratitude evident in every aspect of his now calmed spirit form. How do I proceed? Simply by accepting that you can, Balder said. He gestured toward the far side of the grove, where the waiting spirits had been joined by a new presence. A Valkyrie in gleaming armor, her expression serene as she observed the proceedings from a respectful distance. Halvard followed Balder's gesture, his eyes widening at the sight of the Valkyrie. I did not die in proper battle, he protested weakly. Valhalla cannot be my destination. You died protecting the innocent at the cost of your own life, Balder corrected gently. Few deaths are more honorable, regardless of the circumstances that preceded them. Besides, he added with a smile, my father's hall has room for warriors who have learned wisdom, as well as those who have mastered only the sword. For the first time since entering the grove, something like joy appeared in Halvard's expression. He turned to Balder and Frigg, attempting to express his gratitude, but finding words inadequate. I shall remember, he managed finally, and honor what I have learned here. Go with our blessing, Frigg said warmly. And know that this grove remains open to you should you ever wish to return, not as one seeking healing, but perhaps as one who helps provide it to others." With a final bow of profound respect, Halvard turned and walked toward the waiting Valkyrie. His spirit form seemed to grow more substantial with each step, the last traces of turbulent energy replaced by a steady golden glow, not unlike the radiance that surrounded Balder himself. When he reached the Valkyrie, she greeted him with a warrior's clasp of forearms before leading him toward a path that had not been visible before, a shimmering trail that rose up and away from Midgard, toward the golden halls of Asgard above. As Halvard departed, Balder and Frigg turned their attention to the other spirits who had gathered at the grove's edge. One by one, these troubled souls now approached, drawn by the healing they had witnessed and the hope it offered for their own situations. Some were warriors like Halvard, caught between realms due to circumstances of their deaths. Others were ordinary folk, farmers, craftspeople, mothers, children, each bearing unique burdens that prevented their peaceful transition. Through the deepening night, Balder and Frigg received them all. Some required only brief counsel, others more extensive healing rituals. For each, the Divine Mother and Son offered the specific form of compassion most needed. Sometimes gentle guidance, sometimes firm truth-telling, always with the underlying current of unconditional acceptance that was Balder's particular gift among the Aesir. As dawn approached, painting the sky visible through gaps in the canopy with the first pale hues of morning, the last of the troubled spirits departed, some to Valhalla, others to Helheim or the various specialized realms beyond, each according to their true nature and desire, once freed from the shackles of misunderstanding or self-judgment. Frigg, who had remained throughout the night's work, placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "You do good work here," she said simply, but the pride in her voice was unmistakable. Balder covered her hand with his own. "I do what is needed, as we all must. Thor protects, Father seeks wisdom, Heimdall watches, and I help heal what has been wounded." "A necessary balance," Frigg agreed. She glanced toward the eastern sky, where the approaching dawn heralded her duties elsewhere in Asgard. "Will you remain here today?" Balder nodded. "For a time. The grove replenishes itself after nights such as this one, and I find peace in witnessing its renewal." Mother and son embraced once more before Frigg departed, her form dissolving into a shower of silver light that rose toward Asgard above. Left alone in the sacred space, Balder returned to his customary seat beside the spring, watching as the first direct rays of sunrise filtered through the sentinel trees to touch the pool's surface. Where these golden beams met the water, tiny ripples formed, as if light itself had weight and substance in this magical place. The flowers throughout the grove turned toward this new illumination, their petals opening wider to receive its blessing. Even the air seemed to freshen, carrying away the last lingering traces of the troubled energies that had filled the space during the night's work. Balder breathed deeply of this renewed atmosphere, allowing it to flow through him and restore his own divine energies. Unlike some forms of power that required conquest or domination to sustain themselves, his thrived on giving, each act of healing strengthening rather than depleting his capacity for compassion. As the new day established itself, Balder reflected on Halvard and the many others who had found peace in this grove throughout the long ages. Each came bearing unique sorrows, yet all shared the same fundamental need: to be seen truly, without judgment or condemnation, and to be offered a path forward rather than endless rumination on what could not be changed. This was Balder's gift and purpose, not the thunder of battle or the cunning of strategy, but the quiet, essential work of mending what was broken, be it spirit, heart, or hope. In a cosmos where conflict often dominated both mortal and divine attention, his gentle light provided necessary balance, a reminder that true strength sometimes manifested in compassion rather than conquest. The day would bring new seekers to the grove, new wounds to heal, new burdens to lighten, and Balder, most beloved of the Aesir, would receive them all with the same patient understanding he had offered since time immemorial, a god whose greatest power lay not in what he could destroy, but in what he could restore. Around him, the sacred grove continued its quiet, constant transformation, flowers opening and closing in their eternal dance, waters flowing in perfect cycles of renewal, light and shadow playing across surfaces both mundane and mystical. In this haven of peace amid a universe of struggle, forgiveness forever available, and hope eternally rekindled for all who sought its gentle flame. And through it all, Balder's light shone on, steady, unwavering, and infinitely kind. Our Viking tale has now concluded. You will now hear the peaceful sounds of a crackling fire and gentle ambient noises that will continue throughout the night without any interruptions, helping you drift into a deep and restful sleep. May the stars of the northern sky watch over you, and may you find peaceful rest until the morning light. Sleep well, and good night.